Okay. All right. Got to get some more members in.
I have Councilwoman Dochette joining us.
Hey, everyone.
Councilwoman Farrell is joining us. I'm going to elect the school district folks in with your permission.
Yeah. We'll just have them go. We'll just have them go, and I'll have to work on the communication thing with. Yeah. Are they in? Okay. You muted.
They're joining us. It just takes a second. You should be seeing them momentarily.
Okay. Welcome all school officials. Welcome to the Wednesday, May 12th caucus of the Albany Common Council, our caucus and work session. I will, for the record, just go through. Council members present are Hoey, Fahey, Igo, Love, O'Brien, Doche, Farrell, Flynn, Frederick, and Conti. Also have Council President Ellis with us, along with our staff, Clerk Danielle Gillespie, our Research Council, John Raphael Pichardo, and Corp Counsel Brett Williams. I'd like to again welcome the school district school board folks. We have the superintendent, Ms. Adams, along with the school board. What we will do is we'll just open up and allow you to make your presentation and take questions from us first, and then move on to our regular agenda after that.
That sounds great, Kelly. Thank you very much. We always appreciate you guys making time for us to come and meet with you in caucus and present the budget to you. I'll just say a couple words of introduction and then turn it over to the superintendent, who will introduce her staff that she has with us and give you a brief presentation on the budget. I want to just highlight a couple of things. My colleagues on the board and I are super happy that we can announce that New York State has started a good road toward fully funding foundation aid. That's really important. It's the largest category of state aid, and it makes a really big difference in our fiscal outlook. And that has a particular benefit to those of us in high needs districts like in Albany. We thank every day Assemblymember Fahey and Assemblymember McDonald and State Senator Breslin for their work, as well as to the many advocates who fought hard for that increase in foundation aid, which affects both this year and the next 2 years. I do want to draw to your attention that this year's increase, which is 12%, which is a lot, has to really cover our cost increases for 2 years, because foundation aid was essentially flat last year, but our costs continued to go up. So it is a substantial increase, even if you look at it over 2 years, but it's not quite as overwhelmingly beneficial as it first sounds like. Also, we do know that we have allocated the next 2 years, the New York State budget has committed to fully fund foundation aid. And if that happens, it would be a significant increase for each of those next 2 years. So our fingers are absolutely crossed that that's going to happen. We have other good news, which I know is similar to what you're facing in the city with the access to substantial one-time federal COVID relief funds. We will be using those to do some one-time work like facilities and technology purchases. And we will also be using them to provide staffing for our students during the next few years as we are recovering from the COVID closure. As probably you know, and I imagine you're following a similar process, the ARP spending, we will have to make those decisions once the guidelines are finally out in coordination with our community for additional input. But regardless of what we finalize in terms of how we're going to spend the ARP money, it is one-time money. So any staffing that we would want to maintain after those monies are no longer available would have to be absorbed into the general fund budget. So that's something we're thinking really hard about. I want to draw your attention to also to the history here that the district has really been working very hard to hold the line on property taxes. If adopted, this budget would be the 8th in a row at less than 2%, several of which were zeros and several of which will be, this I think will be the 3rd under 1%. The net result of all of that caution and careful work is that we are down to 45% of our budget funded by property taxes with this budget. That was 53% when I first started keeping track. And when I talked to Assemblywoman Fahey, she tells me that it was even more back when she was on the board, maybe as much as 60 or 65%. So we're doing what we can to increase state aid as a percentage of our budget, reducing our reliance on property taxes. And that's really important for us to think about, because over the long time, as our costs continue to increase every single year, if we continue to hold the line on property taxes as we want to, because we know how important it is to our residents, it does mean we have to find those resources from somewhere, because we do need to be able to cover our contractual and other increases. So our fingers are absolutely crossed that we will have those substantial foundation aid increases the next 2 years, because we're happy to see essentially a 20% increase in graduation rate over the last 6 years, right? We're at like 73%. It was 54% just 6 years ago. So it's a substantial increase. And what makes me even happier is that that increase is coming with a decrease in the gap between the Black graduation rate and the white graduation rate, which is now close to only about 9% at the 4-year term and 8% at 6. So we're really closing that gap. And I think that's really important. And I'm really proud of that work. So with that introduction and kickoff, I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent, who will take you through our presentation with the assistance of her staff, and then we'll answer any questions you have.
Thank you so very much, President Savage. And tonight with us, we have Deputy Superintendent Kimberly Roaring. We have Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education, Cecily Wilson-Turner. Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, Lori McKenna. We have Karen Bechtel, our Director of Curriculum, Professional Development and Instruction, Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development, and also Ron Lesko, our Director of Communications and Operations. And I believe, Mr. Lesko, are you driving the slides this evening? So thank you so very much to the Common Council. We appreciate being able to be here and share this information with you. We always start with our vision, mission, and goals. And we know that this is what we do in terms of keeping our focus with looking at equitable opportunities for all of our students so that they can reach their potential. We look at serving our diverse community and engaging our students in robust educational programs. We have seen challenges over COVID-19. However, we are still making sure that we are putting in the necessary stop gaps, if you will, so that we can continue to increase student achievement, enhance the delivery of quality instruction, build our leadership capacity, and increase accountability, as well as empowering our families to support the success of children and partner with our diverse community. Tonight, we're going to go over our discussion topics. We will talk about the budget proposal, what it is that the voters will consider in May, on May 18th, as well as the instructional planning and the one-time federal funds and the use of those funds, information for our voters, and then also what happens if our budget is not approved. We are looking at rebuilding and accelerating the learning of our instructional program through the investment of our state and federal funds. We're also looking at using our data to identify learning gaps. We know that our assessments have not been the same this year, but we do have data that shows us where our students are performing and what we need to do to close those academic gaps and take our students from where they are with where they need to be. We're looking at our intervention strategies. You're going to hear a lot about social and emotional well-being of our students, because we know that that's been something that has really plagued our students in terms of adjusting to COVID, the disconnectedness that many of our students have felt, and also what is that connectedness that we need to create and rebuild as we move forward with our wraparound services. So what does the proposed budget support? And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to emphasize that the current staffing and programmings, things that we have in place right now, we're looking at maintaining that. We're also looking at the restoration of the Albany International Center, the restoration of the Tony Clement Center for Education. We're looking at moving our 6th grade students to middle school, which is something that we have been looking at doing for several years now. Looking at that equity piece with regard to our 6th graders being at the middle school level. And we do have a feeder alignment committee that will start meeting later on this summer with regard to a permanent feeder pattern for the 22-23 school year and beyond. We are looking at moving the O'Neill 8th graders to the North Albany Middle School, restoring our programs that were cut at the beginning of the school year, and looking at some of the athletic programs, our 9th grade boys and girls basketball, 9th grade baseball, as well as modified 9 boys soccer. Additional social and emotional supports for our students. We have looked at an increased number of behavioral specialists and social workers. In addition to, as we look at that achievement gap, looking at the instructional intervention positions in reading, math, and ELA so that we can support the learning and accelerate the learning of our students. And I want to take a moment that when we talk about accelerated learning, we're not talking about drill skill and the test prep types of activities. The things that we are talking about are, we're looking at strategies to, we're looking at strategies to help our students think at higher levels and also look at where they are right now and how we need to move them along with higher level thinking and project-based learning. Other pieces that we are looking at maintaining would be the full day pre-K in 11 of our elementary schools, relocating the dual language program. Our community schools, we still have our community schools and those initiatives at 7 of our schools. Our band, chorus, and orchestra starting in elementary school. Our Albany Marching Band and Color Guard. This includes Winter Guard and Indoor Percussion Ensemble, which are 2 features of that particular program that we look at maintaining. Also, we look at the AP, IB, and University in the High School programs. And these programs, we want to make sure that we open up those pathways so that more of our students are prepared to be in those classes, along with our CTE pathway, Avid College and Career Readiness programs at Albany High School. Our theater ensemble is an outstanding program, and we are looking at maintaining that program. At the core of it, we have done quite a bit of work with culturally relevant teaching and learning practices and our restorative practices. When we look at our staffing ratios, one of the things that I'd like to emphasize is if you look at the line that has the K-12 enrollment, our enrollment is projected to be at roughly 8,300 students. That is a little bit less than where we started the year with 8,400 students. But if you look at our staffing, especially in our support staff and teacher area, you can see that that is where our numbers have increased in staffing, but also that is to keep that student teacher, student support staff ratio low. So with regard to the 21-22 instructional planning, we look to have a full in-person model 5 days a week. We also look at in-person and hybrid models, and we are still planning on a virtual option pending the state education department guidance with regard to the 21-22 school year. Much of this information is contingent upon the community transmission rate and the physical distancing guidance. And one of the things that we have to look at is the low, moderate, or substantial risk of transmission rates. When we look at that, we can reduce to 6 feet social distancing, but one of the things that complicates it is the fact that in our common areas, we still have to maintain 6 feet social distancing. And so that is when students are eating, when they're drinking, or when they're out in our common areas, we have to make sure that we are still maintaining 6 feet social distancing. So what does that really look like for our instructional model? If you look at this chart, we've tried to simplify some of the information. At the elementary level, we are looking at full in-person based on the 3 feet social distancing and student selections of less than 75%. If those student selections of being in-person or virtual, if it is greater than 75% of building capacity, students may need to be assigned to another school. And this is similar to what we are doing now at the elementary level. At the middle school and high school level, we are looking at full in-person with 3 feet social distancing, and that's also based on 75% of the building capacity. If it exceeds the 75% building capacity, then we would be looking at a hybrid model for grades 7, 8, and grades 9, 12. Our self-contained special education students would remain full in-person K-12. And again, we are still looking at a virtual option. We are planning for that. We are not certain if the State Department will have guidance with regard to that, but at this time, that option is still a valid option. And so we will be waiting for guidance from the State Department of Education. At this time, I'll turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Roaring.
Thank you, Superintendent Adams. Good evening. The district is proposing a 21-22 budget of $270.26 million. On the left-hand side, you'll see the pie chart representing our various sources of revenue. The yellow section is our property taxes at just under 45%. And the blue section is our state aid other than building aid at just under 43% of our total revenue. Building aid is about 4.7%. It's that red section. On the right-hand side, you'll see our estimated expenditures. The large blue area is our instructional program, which represents 80% of our total proposed expense budget for next year. Looking at the revenue over 3 years, in the right-hand column, you'll see the changes from fiscal 21 to fiscal 22. This year, we have recognized a significant decrease in our Medicaid reimbursement for federal aid, and we are anticipating that will continue next year. We are planning to increase our appropriated fund balance modestly by $183,000. We have reductions in our local revenue, which include use fees, pilot payments, interest earnings, and other refunds and reimbursements. We have a combined state aid increase of approximately $9.5 million. As President Savas shared, that's over a 2-year period since we were flat in 2021. And then we have a proposed property tax levy increase of 0.95%, which is equal to $1.14 million. That brings our year-over-year increase to just under $8.7 million. Looking at the proposed expenditures, the first section of our budget is our instructional program budget. In the right-hand column, you'll see the total proposed increase for that area of the budget is just over $8 million. $6.4 million of that is associated with our instructional program and wraparound support services for our students. Just under 1.7 is attributable to charter school payments for next year. That includes an increase in tuition as well as an increase in enrollment. The second area looks at our operations, maintenance, and capital budget, which has an increase of $1.56 million. $1.3 million of that is associated with short-term borrowing. Work at North Albany Middle School has commenced this month, and after the school year ends, we are looking to launch the 5-year plan, which will touch 15 of our buildings. Our administrative operations component of the budget has a decrease of just over $945,000. So again, a year-over-year increase of just under $8.7 million. We started the 2021 year with an adopted budget of $261.56 million. In the fall, we made reductions, including reductions in force, for savings of $14.7 million. This spring in Q3 and Q4, we have been able to restore 180 of those FTEs. We intend to maintain those FTEs throughout the 21-22 year. That represents a $12.7 million increase. Also, when we started our budget development process in January, we looked at the employees currently with us and the contractual salary increases for those collective bargaining agreements, and our health insurance increase was just under $6 million. We show again the debt service increase and charter school payment increase, modest transportation contractual increases for CDTA and First Student, and other adjustments across the budget for a $270.26 million proposed budget next year. This is the 8-year tax levy history. We have 3 years proposed tax levy rate increase of just under 1%. 2 years proposed a 0% tax levy increase. And then in 2019-20 and 2020-21, we proposed a tax levy increase of just under 2%. That brings the average for 8 years to 1.01%. The modest annual tax levy increases support long-term fiscal planning and stability for the district that allows us to sustain programming for our students over time. 80% of our annual budget is for instructional programming and wraparound services. We are experiencing significant increases in healthcare at 10% or more each year. And in a typical year, 88% of our revenue is derived from state aid other than building aid and property taxes. So with a proposed 0.95% tax levy increase, what would that mean for a homeowner in Albany? Using an assessed value of $150,000, the estimated change year over year would range from $31 for the year to $49. And that is dependent upon whether or not that property owner has the STAR exemption, whether it's a basic or an enhanced STAR exemption for our seniors. We do have one-time federal COVID-19 funds available to the district. In December of 2020, the SARISA funds were approved based on the adopted state budget state aid run in early April. We anticipate an allocation of $13.5 million. Those funds are available to the district to use through September of 2023. In March, the American Recovery Plan was approved, and again, based on that adopted budget state aid run in early April, we anticipate an allocation of $32.8 million. Those funds are available to be used through September of 2024. These investments will require a community engagement process. We are committed to hearing from our community in terms of how we'll use those funds. Forums will be held in late May and early June, and there is no tax impact making these investments. Some of our planned new investments for the 21-22 school year utilizing these one-time COVID-19 relief funds include expanding the Albany International Center to be a K-12 program, expanding dual language through a grow-out model, ultimately having 2 classes per grade level, enhancing summer school and after-school programming opportunities for our students, increasing music staffing to 2 FTEs above the 2019-20 staffing levels, while also restoring instrumental music opportunities for 3rd grade students and expanding instrumental music lessons for students in grades 4 through 6. Acquisition of digital tools to support and accelerate student learning, one-time investments in our HVAC and ventilation system, one-time investments in technology hardware in support of the district's long-term technology plan, and the establishment of a virtual academy if permitted by the state education department. Over the last several weeks, we've had the opportunity to convene 3 virtual community budget presentations as a district, and also participate with several community organizations, including the Pine Hills Neighborhood Association, CANA, the NAACP, and with you, the Common Council, this evening. May 18th is our budget vote, and it will be a return to in-person voting. This year, along with the budget, we also have 2 Board of Education seats up for election. Both incumbents are seeking re-election, Vice President Vicki Smith and Board Member Dr. Sridhar Chatur. And additional information can be found at the albanyschools.org/BOE. Also, we share a ballot with the Albany Public Library. There is no public library budget vote this year because they are not doing a tax levy increase proposed. There are, however, 2 Board of Trustees seats up for election. There is 1 candidate on the ballot, Jirai Gauss, and there will be an opportunity for write-in candidates as well. For more information, albanypubliclibrary.org. We are returning to in-person voting at 15 locations citywide. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Masks and social distancing are required, and we do want to highlight that there is 1 new voting location this year. We are unable to utilize the Teresian House, so they will be voting at the Italian American Community Center Pavilion at 257 Washington Ave Extension, and that's for Ward 12, Districts 1 through 3. We also have an additional opportunity for absentee ballots this year. Along with the traditional absentee voting options, the state will allow concerns regarding potential exposure to COVID-19 as a reason for requesting an absentee ballot. What happens if the budget is not approved? If a majority of voters do not approve the budget on May 18th, by state law, the Board of Education has 3 options. They can put up the same proposal for another vote, present a revised budget for voter consideration, or adopt a contingency budget. By state law, if a second vote fails, the district would be required to adopt a contingency budget, which may mean reductions in staffing and programs, would prohibit spending on student supplies, and would require community groups to pay for the use of our school buildings.
So this concludes our presentation, and we do have our instructional team present as well as Ms. Roaring, and I am also available to answer questions. And then President Savage, if there's anything that you would like to add as we answer questions, then absolutely, you're more than welcome to pitch in. So at this time, we open the floor for questions.
I see Mr. Robinson's hand.
Yes, thank you. And great presentation. I do have a question regarding the move of the 8th grade students from Edmund J. O'Neill to North Albany. What was the reason for the move, and how will the impact transportation for students that live near the school?
So I'll go ahead and start, and I believe Ms. McKenna is on the line, and she can address some more details with regard to the 8th graders at O'Neill moving to North Albany. One of the things that we've been looking to do is facilitate some of the decisions and work that the board may need with regard to looking at whether we need a 3rd large middle school or a 4th middle school in our city. And based on our enrollment, we're kind of seeing that it may lend itself to a 3rd large middle school. And so looking at where we are.
Superintendent Adams, we lost your audio.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So looking at the point of moving our 8th graders to North Albany, we do know that we can facilitate that movement as well as offer a full middle school program at North Albany. And we know that there's renovation that's going on there. We are adding classrooms there. We have purchased the other section, which was the Y portion. And so now we have an additional portion to that facility that we're able to use. And so it lends itself to a more comprehensive middle school.
So I'll just add that school had been rolling out. There were only 8th graders. There would only be a small number of 8th graders there next year if we did not move them, which does not lend itself to either fiscally responsible or pedagogically responsible middle school environment. So it's really in the best interest of the students to be part of a larger middle school. And it was easily able for us to provide that capacity for them. You also asked for transportation, and transportation for all students in the district is 1.5 miles by state law. As long as they live more than 1.5 miles, they would be eligible for district transportation.
And I didn't know if there was anything else that we needed to add, or if there was more instructional programming that you had additional questions about.
No, my questions were answered. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Hoey,
Thank you. It was a great presentation. I enjoyed it. It makes things a little bit more understandable. I got a few things I just wanted to bring up. Was one of the things you just said now, the spurred a question. I work at the university, and we are seeing a serious student drop off in the 2025 year. And that's the result of the Great Recession of 2008, where people didn't have children anymore. Have we looked at, when I say we, the school district, looked at the demographics of the number of students, coming up through the years that would warrant adding a third or fourth large middle school?
Superintendent Adams, if it's okay, I'll just take this. We have a new
Absolutely.
demographic report that we are just fine tuning with our demographer, and we expect to be releasing in June. You are absolutely correct. It is a significant problem. We start looking at that at kindergarten, right? So what the interest for us is 5 years or before a kindergarten year, how many kids were there? And we are seeing, if you get the Department of Health, Public Health data about live births in Albany, you do see that declining. Unfortunately, they haven't released the 2019 data yet. They've only gotten as far as 2018. And we were seeing sort of a steady, but kind of consistent with what was happening in the rest of the country decline through 2017. Then suddenly the 2018 number is quite a bit lower. And I am watching, like I'm checking the Department of Health website like a weekly, because I want to know what that 2019 number is, because is that 2018 number just like a very an unusual situation and we're going to pop back up, or is that going to be our new normal? So we almost certainly need 3 solid middle schools. The idea that we would have a few enough students to have 2 middle schools is extremely unlikely. When we looked at this a few years ago, when we decided to do North Albany, the question was, would we have 3 middle schools, or would we have 3 middle schools plus a 4th one? I think it's pretty clear at this point, barring some radical change, which would most likely come from either charter school closure or from major increases to refugees. Those are the 2 things that happen in Albany that are very hard to predict for demographers. If either of those 2 things happen, we might have to reevaluate again. This is life trying to plan in the city school district of Albany. But assuming that those 2 things stay stable or grow incrementally, I can't imagine we would not need 3 solid middle schools. So we will need 3. The question is whether it would be 4, and that seems unlikely.
Yeah, we might have to be a little bit flexible on it. The other thing is with COVID, the population is going to drop tremendous. I've seen the numbers, and people, because of this crisis, they are not having children. And it's, this is not just the United States, it's around the world. People, even China's having a problem with having people to have children, because it's becoming more and more difficult and expensive and hard. So, but thank you. It sounds like you're on top of that, and I appreciate it. I'm really happy. I have a 13-year-old who's gonna be graduating from Hackett this year, going into high school, and I'm happy to see the modified sports coming back. I mean, it's like a lost year, and for me, or for older people, it doesn't matter. But for kids, having that opportunity to compete against their peers in the different school districts in our area, I think it was sad. And I understand it. I wish it didn't happen, but I'm glad that you did it. And finally, my last point, and it's more of and you just touched on it about the charter schools. They didn't have to take a cut, from what I've heard. And you might tell me I'm wrong, and I'd be glad to be wrong on this one. But we had to cut back all our stuff for the public school and the charter school, which is, we have no say in how we're taxed, and we have no representation on that. It's using public money that the taxpayers have no voice in how the charter schools run. And it's something, I mean, there might be a need for it, but we got to come up with a better funding method. And I guess my question is, what can we do as a council or as a taxpayer in the city of Albany to try to get the word out that we need to come up with a better way to fund the charter schools, because it's not fair taking away from our public school system And what you just said now, if a charter school closes, we have to, by law, absorb these students. And it's put an unnecessary burden on our school system. So is there anything that you can suggest that we can do, either as a council or as taxpayers in the city?
I think
Tom?
one of the things that I'll start and then I'll hand it off
Absolutely,
to
go ahead.
President Savage. One of the things that you saw in the slides already is that there was an increase in our charter school tuition. And as superintendents, and I can speak for the superintendents in the capital region, the BOCES capital region, one of the things that we have been advocating for is those districts that are overly saturated with charter schools, that there be a limit of charter schools within those areas. The other piece that I'll expand that advocacy to is we are members of the Big Five Conference with some of our larger school districts, Rochester, Syracuse, Yonkers, New York City. That's also part of the advocacy as well, is the oversaturation of our charter schools. So the advocacy along those lines is extremely important because, again, you saw in the slides, we have to make adjustments for that increase in that charter school tuition. President Savage?
I was just gonna say many of the things you did, which I will not repeat, but to thank you, Tom, for specifically the way you phrased that, because like everyone on the council, I know everybody in the leadership in the district has tremendous respect for every family making the choice that they think is in the best interest of their child. And we will never second guess a parent, whether they choose public, private, charter, whatever makes sense for them. The question is not where you send your child to school. The question is the impact on the fiscal stability of the district, where roughly 80% of our public school students are being educated. So I will be happy, if you'd like, Tom, to send you some of the lobbying information that comes through the Big Five and from the school district directly, to share with you some of that lobbying information that we use every year when we meet with our legislators, both our local delegation and also other legislators. And I'd be happy to share that with you, and you can decide if it's something you might want to advocate further on.
Thank you.
Mr. Conti?
Great, thank you. And thank you for the presentation, very much appreciated. Just a quick question in terms of how information related to the budget and the budget vote on May 18th is communicated to the public, aside from virtual meetings or virtual presentations. Is there a mailing or a budget newsletter that goes out?
Yes, there is. I'm going to ask Mr. Lesko, our communications director, if you would address that, please.
Sure, absolutely. And yes, we do mail our budget edition of capital education to all residents in the city. And that would have landed the end of last week or on the weekend, or maybe the first part of this week. So that has gone out. The information is also always available on our website and prominently available on our website. And we do share it through all of our social media channels as well, trying to reach as many folks in the city as we can. You may know, in a typical year, we have the print edition of capital education on a quarterly basis. We did not do the fall or winter editions this year because of the financial impact of COVID-19 on our school district. But it is critical to us, exactly the question you're asking, critical to us that we get this information about our budget proposal and what's included in there, what the voters will be considering when they go to the polls, to all of our residents. So we did produce the print edition of the budget newsletter, in addition to the online version that we have available as well.
Okay. Well, because the reason I ask is I haven't gotten anything, and so I don't think, typically I don't get anything, and so I'm wondering what kind of a list is used. I'm not sure how widespread that.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to flash mine. Everybody
Yeah.
should have. Let me see if I can get it to focus.
No, I
One
don't.
in my mailbox.
I got
Went
mine.
to
Tell me your address. We get the mailing list directly from the post office. I'll look at it.
Well, it's 151 Chestnut Street. And so is it just like a postal service list? It's not based on a voter registration. Well, I guess you wouldn't use that, but it's just
Correct.
based on a postal service.
every household in the city. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, as I say, I have not. And that would include in prior years as well. So that's why I'm curious in terms of how that information gets out and to what extent people are aware of the the vote coming up.
Thank you. I'll look at that list to see if you're on there and try and find out why you're not. But it is, again, we requested a mailing list, and we've used the same mailing list for years, obviously, from the post office of every residential property in the city of Albany. And it's 39 or 40,000 addresses that we mail the budget newsletter to on a regular basis. So I will look into your situation.
Yeah, and I don't know how the post office classifies residential properties. So if it was a mixed use property that had a commercial use in it, I don't know if that would be included as a residential property by the Postal Service or not.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Ms. Fahey?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I was so pleased to hear the 73% graduation rate. It wasn't that long ago that the graduation rate was in the lower 50s. But I wanted to bring up, this has been such a difficult year, and we've talked a lot on the council about students who were doing virtual learning at home, but they didn't have the they didn't have the computers or the iPads and so on and so forth. And even if they did have them, there were many students who didn't take advantage of them. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how many students you think did not take advantage of the virtual learning, and have they lost so much ground that if they're older students, it might affect their graduation rate? If you could just talk about what has occurred this past year.
So I'll start, and then if I miss anything, Ms. McKenna, and then Dr. Cecily Wilson-Turner, if you could address at both the elementary and the secondary levels. One of the things that we were seeing with our students that were virtual, when we saw the lack of engagement or the lack of logging on, we reached out directly to families through different avenues. Our counselors may have reached out. Some of our hall monitors, we had them assisting with making phone calls. We also engaged our homeschool coordinators doing homeschool visits, home site visits, to see what was the concern. If it had to do with technology, and I'll go back a little bit with regard to that strategy, we started with ensuring that each household had technology, because we knew that we were not at a one-to-one computer student ratio back in March of 2020. Once we were able to make sure that each of our households received the technology, then we started looking at hotspots, and we worked with several of our partners to make sure that we could get hotspots and connectivity into some of our homes, because that was also something that we realized, that it wasn't just having the technology, it was the access to the internet. And so we started working those avenues out. We did apply right away for our Smart Schools grant, which then provided additional computers. That was awarded in July, and we ordered those immediately. We had our paperwork sitting there waiting for the approval, because that was roughly $2 million, a little bit more than $2 million that we could not absorb in our budget. So we couldn't pay for it up front without knowing that we were going to get the funds for it, because we weren't sure. So once we were sure, then we went ahead and made the order. We started receiving our Chromebooks. We had a number of community partners step up 100% and assist us with our students getting computers donated directly to them. We had a couple of our faith-based organizations, Metropolitan Baptist Church. We also had our partnership with AFE that really worked very hard to get several donations so that they could supply our families with computers. And so once we eliminated the fact of having the technology and having internet access, then it was a matter of, now what are some of the challenges that we're seeing? We saw that some of our students were having academic challenges. And so Roughly in November, we started to add time where students could come on campus at the secondary level from like in the morning, and we had a morning session and an afternoon session. And so students could block that time and they could attend school during that time to get additional tutoring support that they may need, or just a space where they could work if they were sharing a device in their home. So those things were done to try and close that gap. The other piece, as we started to bring students back in the learning environment, roughly mid-third quarter, we had students that had been identified that may have had chronic absences, et cetera. They came back to school 5 days a week. And then at the fourth quarter was when we brought back the rest of those families that identified that they wanted in-person learning. They came back in a hybrid model. The elementary level, those students, of course, were in school 5 days a week if that was their selection. And then we still had the virtual for the students at home. I'll tag one last little piece before Dr. Wilson-Turner and Ms. McKenna. We also looked at that social emotional piece because some of it was not an academic component. It was the social and emotional well-being of our students. And so we have, at the elementary level, we had a daily component of social emotional learning. And then as the secondary students started to come back, we started looking at the wraparound services to support those students that demonstrated a need. And at this time, Dr. Wilson-Turner or Ms. McKenna, if there's anything that you'd like to add.
Superintendent Adams, I think you have covered it all. Nicely done.
Thank you. Dr. Wilson-Turner?
She's frozen.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then I wanted to, well, I was very pleased to hear that you're, you know, it's really amazing. The pendulum does swing back and forth, doesn't it? That you're moving towards a more project-based learning in order to get that higher level thinking. I know we had moved away from that for many years. And so it's great to hear that you're moving back in that direction. And I wanted to ask about the dual language program. The ward that I represent has the Delaware Community School in it, and that's going to be a tremendous loss for that neighborhood. Can you tell me a little bit more about why that dual language program is being moved out of that school? And I guess I'm not familiar with where it's going.
Okay. And Dr. Wilson-Turner, if you could, I don't know if she's still frozen or not.
I think I'm unfrozen. Can you hear me?
There you are. Yes, there she is.
Okay.
So I will turn that over to Dr. Wilson-Turner.
So we had a proposal, and actually it's probably been a proposal for a long time, a request for a long time, to actually look at expanding our dual language program. And at its current footprint at the Delaware Community School, there wasn't room to add any additional sections of that program. And so with the return of our Albany International Center, our Director of E&L and Refugee Services, and our principal of Delaware Community School and former AIC principal began to look at the possibilities of expanding dual language as a part of a larger language program, as a part of the site that our Albany International Center would be a part of, and that's at the current Edmund O'Neill building. And so what moving the dual language program will do is in the next year, we will be able to expand up to 2 grade levels. So instead of just having one, what we call one section of, each grade level, we will begin to add a second section and provide more dual language learning opportunities for the students in the City School District of Albany. But again, the move was made to that location because that's where we have space available and we have space for the program to grow and be sustained. Some of you may know that the dual language program has been moved multiple times over its over 20-year run in our district, and we want to make sure it's in a place that can be sustained and have the opportunity to grow.
It's been, I think it's been at the Delaware Community School for quite a while, hasn't it? Did you look at, making more of the school dual language? Was that looked at?
So it's been at dual language, I think, for just over 7 years. I know at one point it was at Eagle Point. It's had a couple of different homes over the course of its tenure, but I do realize that it has been its home has been at DCS for a good amount of time. And the only way that we could expand without impacting the neighborhood students in that community was to relocate it. And we decided not to impact the neighborhood community because we already close out seats to Delaware Community School families that live in that neighborhood because we are housing a dual language program there. So we really looked for a new space that would truly be dedicated to language learning. And so they would be able to work in partnership with our students who are new to the country and learning English. And so it's really a multilingual vision that we have to support language learning in our district.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Flynn?
Thank you all. I have a question about the athletics. I noticed it went down $222,000. I was just wondering if you can explain where that is, whether it's programs or staff or whatever the reason is.
So in the original budget cuts, we did reduce athletics, and over this year, we have been able to look at how we can bring those programs back for next year. And so it is looking at staffing coming back. If you go back to, I think it was a couple of board meetings ago, you'll see that there was a reinstatement of several physical education teachers. We're also opening up the opportunity so that we can get our assistant coaches back and helping to assist with the coaching, as well as with the use of the North Albany Middle School campus, the way in which we have been able to rotate through for training and things like that. We've been able to enhance that particular training out of season by being able to use that campus because of that facility. And so those are the things that we're looking at. Ms. Roaring, I don't know if there's anything else to add.
Superintendent Adams, the only thing I would add is that we are utilizing some of our currently available funds to make some of the uniform purchases and things like that the program needs now. And then that will relieve some of the expense next year.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the takeaway there is it's not going to impact teams, it's not going to impact coaching, and it's partially as a result of being able to make some expenses in this fiscal year rather than next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. And the task force that you're going to make up for the funds, is that going to be kind of like the way the mayor did it? Is there like a criteria who's going to be on this task force?
I think
The task force.
I think
For the 34 million.
We've been talking about forums as opposed to task force primarily, and we will probably also do a survey.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Anani?
First, I just want to thank you for the continued partnership that you have with the city as relates to coming in front of us and talking about the budget and just opening lines of communications and moving forward with our school district. As many of you are aware, many people don't know that council members are not actually on the school board, but there are some people who believe that we have an influence with the school board and also with the school district and have a say. But I just want to thank you all for your continued leadership and the work that's being done, particularly in these challenging times. One of my colleagues brought it up as relates to the digital divide, and something that I've been really intentional about trying to address over the past couple of years. And I'm glad that some of the response from the superintendent is satisfactory, and just look forward to continue working with the school district to put a dent and making sure that everyone in our city have access to affordable, reliable internet in the city of Albany. My first question is more so with the International Center. Can you speak a little bit about that? It's really during the mayor's state of the city address, talked about the increase in refugee and immigrant population moving into the city of Albany. What are some of the actions that is being taken to address this and making sure that we're helping these newcomers?
The Albany International Center is a 2-year optional sheltered program. provided specifically for families that are new to the US, many of whom have interrupted formal education. So the kids were not in school in their home country, and then they became refugees and ended up here. And so they're both learning a language, learning a culture, and learning how to go to school all at the same time. And so we have always had, always meaning for the last 3 or 4 years since the refugee numbers started really climbing, the Albany International Center for the upper grades located at North Albany. And then this year, as a result of our budget cuts, we made that more of a school within a school model at Albany High. But next year, the plan is to expand that to be a K-12 program housed at Edmond O'Neill, as we talked about before, in conjunction with the dual language program. So that will be a really important program. Again, that's optional for parents. It is a program that you can stay in for up to 2 years as your language skills increase and improve, and you're ready to join mainstream education. And we still do provide language supports at almost every school, maybe even every school. I'm sure the superintendent knows, for language learners who are in our every school as well. And we are preparing and planning for that increase. Again, what we saw was an increase for a long time, followed by a decrease or a lack of increase over the last couple of years, but we expect that will be coming back.
And my next question is more so as it relates to taxes in our city. When the mayor presented the city's 2021 budget, the mayor said that she was hoping to cut taxes prior to COVID. I understand that the school district is estimated to receive approximately $46 million from the American Rescue Plan, and to replace lost revenue as a result of the pandemic. My question is more so, why is the district proposing a tax increase when a district is receiving this historic amount of revenue?
I will start that, and then I'll turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Roaring. And Mr. Lesko, you may want to put those slides back up so that we could kind of walk through that a little bit more closely. One of the things that we have seen, and I want to clarify, we have $9.5 million in our foundation aid that has been increased. And the foundation aid is our base level of funding, but that's also over 2 years. And so we're still looking at, while in 1 year it shows as a 12% increase, it's actually a little bit less than that, roughly half, simply because that's over 2 years. I think, Mr. Lesko, if you could share the slides.
I also just wanted, while we're waiting for your audio to come back in, you keep kicking out, Superintendent, the 46 number, I think that was the number that was reported in the Times Union. The real number for the ARP funds is 38.2. Yes, Superintendent, Deputy Superintendent. So
he's including both of the different funds, so the state aid funds and the federal. Yeah, so when it was presented to us, both were included. So when you add those two together, it's a little bit over 46 million.
I see. So that was confusing.
We don't get the other one. So for us, we just combine them.
I see. Well, for us, the factor is what's recurring and what's one time. And just like for the city, the one-time funds are one time. And so they are not going to allow us to provide ongoing staffing in a recurring way, because by 2024, they will no longer be available to us. So, I understand that the city has made different decisions than the school district has made. We think that this is the best, most appropriate thing for us to do in order to mitigate the potential of a significant fall off in revenue as those one-time funds no longer become available to us.
Mr. Lesko, I think if you go to, I'm trying to see if it's slide 13 or so, and okay, or maybe the one right before that. Okay, I think those slides, Ms. Roaring, if you could walk us through those slides again, because I think that kind of shows, and then we can go to the next slide as we talk about the one-time funds.
Okay, so looking at the proposed revenue, we are recognizing a decrease in our Medicaid reimbursement. We are also recognizing a decrease in local revenue, which again comes from use fees, rebates and reimbursements, interest earnings, and pilot payments that are going down next year. We do have a $9.5 million state aid increase, including building aid year over year. But again, that's really a 2-year increase because we were held flat in 2021. So we're looking at 2 years of increased expenditures that are being absorbed by that. Looking on our expense side, I would highlight a few things. One would be that our charter school payment increase is about 1.7 million next year. Our health insurance increase is anticipated to be about $5 million increase year over year. And our debt service is 1.3 million. When we merge the three of those together, that's $8 million of expense increase. And that largely consumes the $9.6 million state aid increase we're looking at. So we have proposed a modest tax levy increase for next year to help provide that recurring revenue that gives us that long-term fiscal stability that allows us to sustain the programs that our children very much need. And then looking to target some of those federal funds for one-time expenditures in our maintenance area, in our facilities and technology, as well as using those resources to expand programmatic opportunities for students, such as growing out the dual language program and AIC, providing additional supports for students in after-school programming and summer programming this year, really enhancing those opportunities for students. And then the various music additional opportunities we're looking to provide students last year. Unfortunately, this year was a very different year. Students didn't have the opportunity to participate for a number of reasons, including staffing. And bringing those staffing levels beyond what we had in 2019-20 really opens the door for many of our students to participate in instrumental music. And then also accessing some of those digital tools that will allow students to accelerate their learning and growth in their academic career.
Thank you. And my final one, just want to say thank you for some of the improvements that we are seeing as it relates to the graduation rate in our school district. And as a former coach at Albany High, athletics is very important to me. Being an all-state running back at high school, it gave me opportunity, not to brag or nothing, but it gave me opportunity to pursue my career. And everybody laughing? Like, okay. It gave me ample opportunity to put me where I am today. And I just want to say, my colleague, Tom Hovey, echoed as relates to the athletic program and to make sure that we're supporting athletics. Athletics could be used as a vehicle for our students to get where they need to go and to succeed in life. So I just want to stress the importance of athletics, and if there's funding available to continue to fund athletics. Our coaches are mentors, they're lifesavers. Sometimes just student athlete making a wrong decision, it could be a difference between talking to a coach or not talking to anyone. So I just want to say that if we could continue to fund athletics, fully fund athletics, the residents of our city will greatly appreciate it. And I think that it would change lives in many of the marginalized communities who don't have the after school programs that are available to some in our city. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. Thank you. And it's always nice to see familiar faces. My question is around attendance. My question is around the transportation, and we have talked about the 1.5. Has there been any thought or conversation with the state leadership about making an adjustment to the 1.5 when you factor in certain neighborhoods and their neighborhood schools, their slots are already taken? And so it creates scenarios where, you have families walking 1.4 miles, 1.45 miles. And if not, are we looking at alternatives? Back in the days, we used to go on a case-by-case basis, and, with attendance being is always been important, but, extremely, that's what we're focusing on. Has anybody put thought into those scenarios?
So we have our Community and Government Relations Committee, and I'm going to ask Mr. Lesko to kind of join in on this response, as well as President Savage, because that has been one of the things that we have worked on. And there was an Assembly bill and a Senate bill as well with regard to looking at the criteria for safe zones and looking at how we then could take that criteria and apply it to our needs here in the district. And so we did have that was one of our legislative priorities. So yes, we have been doing that advocacy with regard to transportation. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Lesko to chime in with regard to community and government relations, as well as transportation. Is he frozen?
I wonder, let me start and then Ron can pick up. So we have lobbied on that issue quite extensively. Two ways. One, which would be obviously the preferred approach, I think, for the entire state, would be to have a truly equitable distribution of our transportation dollars, right? It should not be the case that people with large amounts of family wealth have the access to transportation, and kids who really need that transportation don't have access to it. But unfortunately, the state law, as you well know, is 1.5, no matter where you are, no matter what your family circumstance is. That is how the law is written. So we tried lobbying for just a straight reduction so that we could make that a smaller radius. And the guidance that we got from every legislator we spoke to is there's no way we can get that passed. It just would cost the state too much money, and there's just no way we can get it passed. So instead, we took a slightly different tactic, which the superintendent mentions, which is a thing called the child safety zones. And that is an aspect of the law that says that if it's unsafe for the child to walk, then we can provide transportation at less than that 1.5. So there's two issues there. One is that the regulations are inconsistent with the existing law. The other is that the current law is not sufficiently broad. It does not, the regulations as a result are very suburban in orientation. It's unsafe if there's no sidewalk. It's unsafe if the speed limit is very high. It's unsafe under those kinds of circumstances, which are very transportation oriented, but the regulations don't incorporate a high vacancy rate, for example. They don't incorporate a high percentage of industrial properties or a high crime rate. So we are continuing our efforts to try and get the law changed and the regulations changed to make it possible for us to just declare a child safety zone that would allow us to legally provide transportation for children in a smaller radius. And that is what we are trying desperately to do. It's actually, as soon as we get through May 18th, it's my #1 priority, because I've been in touch with some folks at the Department of Transportation to try and get the regulations changed, because even the regulations are not completely consistent with the law. So there's some work that could be done even without a law being passed, if we can get Department of Transportation, who's, for reasons having to do with the way the law is written, it falls to Department of Transportation to change those regs. So you're right, it's a problem, and it's something I know we need to fix. I know transportation is really important for attendance, and it's something we are trying to work on. We are substantially constrained by the way that the New York State law is written around transportation dollars.
Thank you.
Ms. Farrell?
Hi, and I actually, when I was in Pat's office, I was the one that started on the child safety zone thing. And I would just add that the law is actually written with rural schools in mind. So if you think about, if you're driving in the country, there's the 55-mile-an-hour school roads, which is entirely legit. Children should not be walking on those. But of course, the concept that the school district always, our small city is always fighting against is that there's a lot of kids that shouldn't be walking 1.5 miles. So I don't know any 4-year-old that should walk 1.5 miles. I don't care where you are. I mean, and our babies, you know, well, I don't know where our pre-K, I should have said 5-year-olds. But I don't know any 5-year-old that should be walking 1.5 miles to school. So we really appreciate your work on that, because that is a huge, huge issue. And we always appreciate you coming in here and all of the work that you do for our kids, because certainly I believe, and I think most of my colleagues believe, that we can only be as good as our schools. And that is really, when you talk about any part of our city and our community, it is the heart of our community. It's the children, the families coming together. And it's even when you start talking about revenue, one of the biggest issues we have in the city of Albany is a revenue problem. And that is driven strongly by our schools. And that's something that I know several of us on here at different points have fought very hard to encourage families to stay here by being here ourselves, but also by really trying to create an environment to show what a great community we have and to show what great schools we have. So we appreciate you continuing that really incredible work, because that is ultimately what makes our city great. And I think we are all very aware of that. And I just, like a quick, with a computer issue, I just wanted to give like a quick shout out to the Albany Fund for Education. I know Superintendent Adams, you did, but I'm on the board for that organization, and our executive director, Mari Shopsis, and the board worked so hard to get as many computers into children's hands as possible. And it was so important. As Councilmember Nane often says, he talks a lot about connectivity and how important that wireless connection is. And I think that this crisis highlighted that. And I also wanted to say, so before I was on the school board, I was part of this big, huge committee about where sixth grade should be. And we decided that it should be in the middle school. And there's a lot of reasons that went into it. But I am impressed that you guys are finally doing it because this was before I was on the school board. So clearly I didn't do it then. But I know the reason why we didn't do it. And it's because it was incredibly complicated to actually move that body of students. So I think it's amazing. It is, if you're aware of the actual issue, things change in middle school, and kids just get different access to different things. And I really appreciate, I know that whatever went into that, it was a lot of work, and I appreciate you investing in that, because that is something that's really, I know, impacted our kids and has created some inequitable situations that we haven't loved, and the teachers it's been difficult for them to deal with as well. So thank you for actually making it happen after 12 years. I don't even know. So I have to say I am, and I appreciate my colleague Councilmember Nane bringing up, as somebody that has been deeply involved in budgeting and funding and aware of the state budget runs over the years, I am fully aware of the tax levy impact year to year. And actually, before I get into that, I do have a question. I'm sure that we are at a stage where our building funds that is impacting our homeowners. Do we have those figures, but what our homeowners will be paying next year on the building bonds?
I know that we were sharing what the impact would be of the tax levy. So in terms of the building bonds, I think we'd have to go back. I know that we looked at it with STAR, without STAR.
Is that, and so that is wrapped up in your tax levy impact?
Yeah, the increase shows in the debt service number.
Okay.
But I don't have the total number in my mind.
No, that's, as long as it's something that I just wanted to make sure that was not an additional
right here.
Something that would have to be considered additionally. So
additional information on that if you'd like.
Go ahead.
No, as long as it's wrapped into the overall, that's great. And I appreciate you guys doing that because I know that that also impacts your overall budget totals as you're looking at them and the impact on people. So I went back through, there's a lot of things that you get rid of over the years, and then there's some things that you can't bear to get rid of. And one of mine is state aid runs. I have them until from 2013-14, which is a little weird, I will admit. But, and I have to say, I do not recommend going back to when I was on the board. We were in a dire financial situation, and we were really trying to, that is when we did have in the 50s graduation rate. There were some dire things that were happening. I think it is fantastic that we have a significantly higher budget than when we were on the board. And I think a lot of the choices that were made is a good one. But in the 2013-14 budget, there were 8,272 children, and our foundation aid, so just foundation aid, not all the other things, I figured that would be easier, was $49.9 million. In the upcoming budget, we're looking at 8,328 children, so a similar amount of children, and the foundation aid is $92 million. We are in a pandemic, and right now, I have people in my ward, and I know that property owners don't reach out to you the same way that they do to council members, but I have people in my ward that are homeowners that haven't been able to pay their mortgage. I have small scale landlords that own like their house and one other one that haven't been able to pay their mortgages. And I could not believe it when I saw that you guys were raising taxes. I understand that you're going back to that broad many years. I also understand that, that you didn't get an increase last year. No one did. We're in a pandemic. And it is absolutely unconscionable to me. I'm sick about it that you guys would make that choice. And the thing is, our kids, I get it. Our kids are hurting. I have kids. I've joked, like I basically have 2 high school dropouts that are, they're allowed to be. And and I don't envy any of the choices that you've had to make through this. But I absolutely could not believe that the choice was made to raise taxes this year. This is the year that this year is when it's really going to hit people. This is when those mortgage payments that you haven't been paying is going to come in. Our taxes are already high. And I firmly believe in, I so deeply believe in education, and I deeply believe in paying for education. And I have advocated and will continue to advocate in the future for a tax increase to pay for education. I just believe in it. It's the right thing. But we also need partners that understand when our city is struggling, and our city is struggling. And I cannot believe that you didn't listen to that and that you made the choice to raise taxes. It is, to me, it's not okay. And I'm just absolutely floored that that choice was made. I'm also concerned, and I have to say that I think during the pandemic, we all had to make different choices that who knows what will happen in the future with them. But I hope that I'm concerned about precedents. It's something we deal with a lot in state and local government. Precedence matters. And even if there is an extreme situation, people will bring it back and say, well, you did it then. So I am very concerned about the precedence of going fully remote for secondary as a budget choice. I hope that it's something that you guys have clearly, that you do not actually think that you're fulfilling your constitutional obligation to go fully remote. It was a unique situation, but it's not, that to me is not fully educating a child. I also think I'm concerned of the precedence of having a classroom of children being taught by a virtual teacher. I think that is a highly concerning precedent. And I hope that you guys, as you are moving through this process, are separating what are choices that you couldn't make because you had to make, because we were in a pandemic situation, and choices that are actually okay, because we have to come to a point where we all understand that that's not actually okay. I am scared I don't envy you moving forward. I think that, and I can tell you, I fully expect tax increases in the future, because I think that a lot of our kids are going to be suffering from being fully remote for a year. A lot of our older kids. I have three children. My oldest is in college, but my younger two, I had one that just rocked remote, that it loved it, decided to stay with remote. But I have to say, this child also made the choice to do homework on a Friday night when they could have done other things. So a very motivated person. I have the other one that got really good at skateboarding. And when they are in that secondary school zone, even if you're a highly engaged parent, you don't know what's happening. You don't know how to be in touch. You don't know how to hold them accountable. And fortunately, they're going off to college and got into college, and I'm thrilled. And but if that child was in middle school, I don't know. We probably wouldn't be here. Which is crazy to me to think, but because we have the option to do other things, we're fortunate in that. So it's my hope that those precedents that you are all working very hard to make sure that people know that that was not actually an acceptable precedence, that you had no other choice because of the pandemic. And that is not to minimize the hard work of everyone that went into it, because I know it's so hard, and I appreciate all of our teachers and staff. We, through AFE, we did a lot of work, not just with computers, but with giving backpacks full of food to kids, and the staff has just been absolutely incredible. So I know people are working hard. I'm not minimizing hard work. I'm just saying that there's some great ways to educate a child, and there's some not so great ways to educate a child. And it's my hope that you clearly delineate so you don't create a precedence that hurts our children in the future.
So thank you so very much. I appreciate hearing all of your thoughts, and you and I've had an opportunity to be able to talk, when we talked about bringing our students back and what that means. And so I'll start with, as I've always said since the very beginning, we know that it is critically important for our students to be in person and learning in person. We are in a worldwide pandemic. It is not just us, it's around the world. And so have we learned some best practices about virtual learning? Yes, we have. Have we learned some best practices about blended learning? Yes, we have. Have we looked at what we can do to improve in-person learning? Yes, we have. And I think one of the things to understand is that we are not planning for full virtual 7-12, K-12, unless there's something out of the ordinary that happens. When we talk about a virtual option, while I truly respect and understand what you say, we also have a group of families that are not comfortable, because it's a worldwide pandemic, who want their children virtual, which is why when you look at the slide that we're sharing, the virtual option is not mandatory. It is an option for those families that moving forward may still have a little ajna about coming into the schools. Regardless of what we do, we're in a worldwide pandemic. Now, we also know that there have to be some allowances and permissions via New York State Education Department. And so depending on what happens there, virtual may or may not be an option, but we have to plan as though it is, because as it stands now, we are still providing that option for those families who look for that option for their children. But first and foremost, we are looking at making our actual plans at bringing our students back in person 5 days a week. We are looking at that. We know that there's also the building capacity that we have to align with. If we have 3 feet social distancing, which is where it stands right now, we know that 100% capacity is not going to be able to happen, because We have the 6 feet social distancing in some of the common areas. So we have to work around those kinds of things. And so we have to look at what the parameters are by which we have to make that decision. And so I totally understand. I mean, what I would love to see is we have zero transmission, we have no social distancing, and everybody comes back to school. And whether we wear a mask or not, that's based on the guidance. And if that's the only limitation that we have, then we are back fully in person. But there are some constraints beyond our control that we have to align with. But I do want to make it very clear that we want to have all of our kids back in person, because we know, especially at this age group, these are the things that work best for our students. When we have them in person, when we can do, the face-to-face learning, when we can engage them in high critical thinking activities, when they can be engaged in project-based learning, when they can have the full complement of athletics and extracurricular activities, along with our enrichment activities, our music program, our art, our theater, chorus, band. All of those things, as educators, it's not a hope. We understand the whole child development. It's not that we don't, we do. And we have those things in place, but there are certain things that we can't control. And so I want to assure you and our community that education is not just about the academics, it's the whole child, which is another reason why we're looking at the social and emotional learning for our students being embedded in the program. And so that's something that we're looking at, not just at the elementary level, but also at the secondary level. And so when we talk about those kinds of things, those are the things that we're looking at moving forward. And we are trying to, those things that we need to sustain over time. And I think this kind of lends itself to the taxes, and then I'll open it up for Deputy Superintendent Roaring or President Savage to chime in. When we look at those kinds of things within our budget, and I understand what you're saying. We know that our community is hurting. We know that. However, education can't be an afterthought. And we have to plan for.
I'm sorry, you're saying that I'm considering education an afterthought?
I
because
didn't
that is
say
certainly
that.
not what I'm saying. I'm saying that right now you should prioritize the community and
I'm not saying
looking at that.
If I can finish, I think it will be clear what I'm saying. I'm not making any accusations. I am making statements, because I don't believe you made any accusations either. And so I don't want you to presume that I am making any accusations, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm just explaining our stance. I'm just explaining that we are looking at what we need to do moving forward, and that we have really thought intentionally and purposefully about what our students need and how we can close that academic gap, but also that social and emotional learning gap. And those are the things that we are trying to put into our budget for sustainability as we move forward. And so I truly understand. I understand. I can't say that I don't understand, because I do. And I understand the difficult decisions that all of us have to make across the board. And so in looking at the needs of our students, and when we look at what we are trying to build in for sustainability, those are some of the reasons that we have made the decisions that we have. And so I'll open it up for any other comments from Ms. Roaring or from President Savage.
The oddness of a virtual meeting, I can't make eye contact with Deputy Superintendent Roaring, so I'll jump in and she can follow.
Yeah, I maybe, Ron, yeah, if we could just see our pretty faces.
There's everybody. So I just want to second what the superintendent said about in-person education. Not only is that what we want, but it's what we're advocating for. I know that many people are aware of the efforts made by all of the regional superintendents with an advocacy piece around the changes we really need to see to the New York State Department of Health regulations, guidance around COVID that would guarantee us the ability to get 100% of our kids in person all day, every day. 92 superintendents in the region signed on to that. what the guidance as it currently stands is really difficult, and it's not an Albany situation. It's not just us, it's everybody. If you need to keep your kids 6 feet apart at lunch, we've all been in a lunchroom. We know the kids are not 6 feet apart. So if they need to be 6 feet apart at lunch, then we're going to need to provide some other space for them to be in, or more time for lunch. And as I know that those of you who've had kids in Albany schools know, we already have lunch at 10 o'clock in the morning in some places. So really more lunches is not really an option. We need more space for lunches. So we are having tents, and we'll do all of that. That has some weather limitations. We are not San Diego, sadly, so February is not going to be a tent. The better solution, if it's consistent with the public health guidance, is to limit that to 3 feet. And then we could start talking about really getting 100% of our kids in. I think this is just me thinking, guessing. I do not know this. It's likely that we're going to see some of that guidance change, right? Because we're going to see that our numbers are down. We are right now in the yellow zone in the CDC guidelines. All of the counties surrounding us are not, however, so it's a little bit alarming, right? We could easily drift back to orange, or please not drift back to red. And if those things happen and we have to be at 6 feet, we could very well be hybrid again for 7 to 12 next year. But that is, in my way of thinking, a backup plan, right? Our plan is the guidance is going to change, or we're going to have 3 feet separation in the classrooms and less than 75% of the kids choosing in-person education, which is going to allow us to get 100% of the kids all day, every day. The important factor, and I think it's the one you were alluding to, Ginny, is that if we have to make a different decision, it's a decision that we're going to make on public health reasons, not on budget reasons, right? And that's like every other district in the state is going to be faced with, and probably the country is faced with that exact same thing. And that's different than what happened this year. This year, as a result of gamesmanship from the New York State Department of Budget, Schenectady, Albany, Rochester, Buffalo, all of the big schools went full virtual. Some of them are still full virtual, right? We still have kids in New York State who are not in school. And so we are doing our very best to do what we absolutely can without putting ourselves in such a dire fiscal situation that we end up with layoffs twice as deep, right? And that is what we would have done if we had made a different decision.
Oh, absolutely. And I understand. My point is coming from the campaign for fiscal equity era, with that concept of the sound basic education, setting that precedence. So when initially those, and not just Albany, those other districts going fully remote as a choice, as a budget choice, that's what concerns me. So
I actually don't, I mean, I think as a practical matter, there is no such thing as virtual education in the New York State education law, right? This was
that's a good point, yeah.
It was only because of the executive orders. It's like, even if we wanted to do, which we don't, it's not a thing in the law that we could do that.
I
So
really appreciate that. That's a wonderful thing. And I also fully appreciate the plans for next year. I also totally understand the families that might make the choice to stay home. And it means a lot that you are looking to support them through that. This is certainly not an easy choice, any of this. And there might be opportunities. There are days that it is really cold and our kids do have to walk 1.5 miles. Having a virtual opportunity for our 6-year-old baby that doesn't want to walk, the parents don't want them to walk 1 mile in and would rather stay home with them and do something virtually where they can still get something. There's potential for growth. And I mean, I will have friends that will hate me for it. I wouldn't mind, having, especially in secondary, I don't mind if they don't have snow days. Although I still have spoons in my freezer, which if you know me, it's like an ongoing joke because my kids still want a snow day. So, but I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I think that's why we wanted to make sure that where we have that virtual option listed, that's why we have that note about the state education department, because we may not even be permitted to do that, but we don't know that yet. And because we don't know if those executive orders continue, then we would have to have some type of option, because then it would be permissible. And so that's why we put it there, and we made sure that we noted that we'd have to have that guidance from the state ed.
Well, I am relieved because one of the things that concerned me was a potential for, especially with some of the things that were in the past coming out of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that this would be used as an opportunity that fully virtual is just a great option for students. And for some students, it may absolutely be. I don't want to minimize that. But I will say, I think all of us have seen a loss of just important social things. It's a person that you may have not known, but dealt with, and suddenly they're slightly different and not as pleasant to be around because they just haven't dealt with people in person for a long time. So
if I could, I'll add just a little bit to that with some of the research that we're starting to see coming out about pre-K. And you know how we believe in pre-K. We know that that's our earliest learners, but with so many of our pre-K students being at home, some of the research is coming out that some of those pre-K kids that are now going to school, you're seeing that social emotional piece. It's not at the same level because they've not been around other students. Some of those, I don't want to say just courtesies, but just some of those behavioral expectations of collaboration, cooperation, those kinds of things are very different even at that age group. And we're seeing that research come out because they're able to do some of those studies and see that now. I know that we'll see more of it coming up in the next few years because we're going to see now the impact, the true impact of COVID-19 in those youngest learners as they move through the system. And so I think that those are things that we really have to be very mindful of, which is another reason why, not just for our older students, but for all of our students, you're seeing a focus in, as we come back and what we're building in, the additional social workers, behavioral specialists, school psychologists, those positions. We absolutely value that because we know that we have to have that social emotional learning for our students.
Thank you.
See, Judy has a hand up. I don't know, Judy, are you?
Judy, you're muted.
We can't hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm a little flustered. We lost something valuable. Oh, and it's been found, I'm being told. All right. So I just felt the need to chime in about how important education is. And we talk in the city, on the council, about a lot about equity issues, about health equity issues, about policing equity issues, about housing equity issues, about parks and services. For me, there are a few that are as important as an education, and that's partially because I know I got a great public school education, and I would have been a lost child without that. And it's why I've always been supportive of high quality public education for everyone, and why I've said if it's not good enough for my kids, it's not good enough for everybody's kids. I appreciate some of the concerns that Ginny is bringing to the fore about virtual learning. I can't imagine me having done it. I can't imagine my kids having done it. I can't imagine having allegedly supervising my kids at any age while working from home. And I think I refer to this as, I think that we will come to refer to it as the lost year when it comes to education. And I think there's going to be consequences financially for the school district, because I think as time goes on, we will find a lot of children just simply needing to repeat a year, more so than we have in the past. And so that is the city, the school district, picking up the cost at some point for another whole year of education for, I'm sure, hundreds of kids, probably thousands. of kids in our system. And that's unfortunate. But if it comes to that, I think that we need to be mindful of that. We need to do it. In some cases, I think we may need to encourage parents to have their kids repeat a year. And I think the sooner we do that, so kids are not losing self-esteem because they don't know what's going on in their next year of school, the sooner we do that, the better off we will be. And finally, I just want to say what the state did in the way of cutting foundation aid was inequitable, immoral, outrageous. And I understand that you guys were dealing with some of the consequences. I wish to some extent that we knew maybe some of the things that we know now with regard to COVID numbers coming down, with there being a vaccine. Albany County is one of the highest vaccinated, has one of the highest vaccination rates. I think that that's one of the reasons why we're in the yellow zone right now. And I know that there's a struggle with getting, we'll never get to 100%. Hopefully we will get to much better than where we are at this point. But I would have supported a tax increase to make up the difference, to help us begin to make up the difference in what we lost in foundation aid. I think if, and I think a lot of people would have supported that if we knew that the biggest impact was a 1-year impact as opposed to this huge question mark of what is going on. So you're educating a lot of children with a lot of needs, and I appreciate everything that you're doing to try and figure that out. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we will shift to our regular meeting. I'd like to say thank you to Superintendent Adams and President Savage for the presentation and your thoughtful leadership with the school district. And we'll shift to our regular caucus. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thanks, you guys.
Have a good night.
Appreciate being here.
Okay, we'll jump right in. Mr. Ellis, you still there? I know you've said you have to go.
Yes, I am still here. Yep.
Okay, so we'll just jump right into our agenda for Monday for our approval of minutes from the previous meeting. We'll have the May 3rd meeting minutes for approval. Moving on, there are no local laws introduced, but under local laws held, we were slated to have F, G, H, and I dealt with. F and G will be in the law committee tomorrow and discussed. So depending on the outcome, they may or may not be moved. And H and I were held for further discussion, I believe, from the law committee. Okay, moving on to ordinances introduced. We have by Ms. Frederick and Mr. Johnson, authorizing the sale of Delaware Paper Street and a portion of Alexander Street. That'll be a referral to finance. That's an ordinance 145221. Okay, that's an intro.
Kelly, can I just jump in there and just say, I would love for us to somehow or other get readable maps or have somebody explain to us what those maps are. They're very small. And normally you would be able to maybe go, somebody would come and present them, but we're still dealing with small screens. So I just wanted to, hopefully staff can figure out how we can have a better understanding of what those parcels really are.
Okay, and so, maybe JR or Danielle, you can reach out to planning to try to get.
I think Mr.
maybe-
Williams has it.
Yeah,
Okay, maybe a larger map.
I think the PDF version that I attached with the legislation, that PDF should be capable of being zoomed in
Zoom.
pretty well. It's pretty high definition PDF. I'll double check on that, and if there is a higher definition version available or one that can be better zoomed in, I'll try and find that as well.
Right.
And as for having someone come in to explain that, I imagine that the representatives for the sale intend to do so at the finance committee meeting when that's addressed. I did have a question possibly for Councilmember Farrell regarding the finance committee meetings. I know there's it's called a moratorium, I guess, on.
We're still going to have finance committee. So I will actually be, we're definitely going to schedule one for June.
Okay.
We do have other issues coming forward. It's on moratorium on everything, just on personnel issues until we have that resolved.
Understood. Just
And I
wanted to
also
clarify
want
that.
to make sure that we, because it's also the function to receive the financial updates, which I think are pretty vital right now. So, so don't worry. I know that you're really asking because you just love going to finance committee meetings.
Who doesn't?
I'm not going to deny you of that fun.
Appreciate it.
And Kelly, I just also want to know, I know this is just an introduction for this ordinance on Monday, but I will be recusing myself from this particular ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We'll note that in the record. So thank you. That'll be a referral to finance. Okay, next under ordinances introduced 155221. And that's an ordinance regarding pavement openings, streets and sidewalks. That'll be a referral to general service by Mr. O'Brien. That'll be by Mr. O'Brien to general service, 155221. Okay, next we'll have ordinance 165221 by Ms. Love. It's ordinance authorizing the sale of 21, is it 21 and 23 or just 23? The property at 23 Lark Street. It'll be a referral to finance also.
And I just want to make sure on that everybody received the updated version of that. The version that initially went out late on Friday had to be updated, which I think I sent that out to JR on Monday. I just wanted to make sure everyone had that version.
I know I got it.
I sent that, yeah, I did. That sent out in the reminder.
I'll be recusing myself from this one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Okay, next. To resolutions introduced. Resolution 465221R by Mr. Conti in relation to the permit parking system. I'll be a referral to law.
This really needs to pass. This is
Yeah, the home rule message needs to go out. Pat Fahey's office wants it ASAP. Me and Brett have to send it out to Assembly Council and Senate Council ASAP.
We're operating against a deadline here. This legislative session is scheduled to end. The calendar says June 10th. This is just a home rule message for the permit parking bill, the expansion and making it permanent that we had in last year. We didn't get to do it last year because the legislature all of a sudden, in the wake of the pandemic stuff, just did a one-year extender of the existing system. So this includes the provision that we've been talking about. And I sent out a map earlier, so you can get a sense as to what the expansion of the radius from 3/4 of a mile to 1 mile is. That's important for areas like in some of Park South, Pine Hills, Washington Square area. It also increases the number of spaces we can allocate by 750. That's something that, for Councilmember Love, some of the issues she has, we need the additional spaces to try to address some of the issues there. It also would make the permit system permanent, so we don't have to go back to the legislature every 2 years or 1 year or whatever. So even with them introducing this bill, and it got in a little bit later than I would have liked it, but even with them introducing it, it is going to be an uphill battle to try and get something like this through. But we're at the mercy of the legislature and their clock, and they can't do anything on this until we send them a home rule message. So that's why it's really kind of urgent that we get this to them. And depending on what happens, we might be revisiting this issue again, because if they amend the bill, every time they make an amendment, we need to do another home rule on it. And as I say, they're scheduled to adjourn June 10th. So we're under a real time frame here.
Thank you, Mr. Contis. That'll be a pass.
So if everybody's okay, thanks.
For Monday.
If I can just jump in here. You never know what happens with the legislature. And Richard was just talking about if there's any amendments. And given the tight timeframes or whatever, if we need, subsequent to passing this on Monday, if we need to approve an amendment, I do think that would be cause to do a special meeting, because this has been such a challenge to get anywhere on for my entire time on the council. So.
Yeah, and remember this is just an author. I mean, if they do pass this, it's an authorization to us. So it comes back to the council to actually determine where the expansion is, where those spots are allocated. Yeah, if we need to do a special meeting, we would have to do that. We've done that in the past for home rules when we're under a tight time frame, because we're at the mercy, as I say, of the legislature.
Thank you, Richard. President Ellis, just on notice, we may need a special meeting.
Well, we don't know yet.
I got my fingers crossed.
If it comes to that.
Thank you, everyone, for contributing to the conversation on that. Next resolution by Ms. Fahey regarding requesting immediate action for state, local, and federal officials to evaluate chemical gas. Do you want to speak to that, Ms. Fahey?
Yes, let's see. Well, regardless of what happens with the ordinance that bans the use of tear gas, all that I've read about is that, the tear gas is not regulated. We don't know, how it's manufactured and distributed, the different concentrations. There are few studies, a lot of them are old, about the effects it has on people. A lot of the studies have been done on healthy military personnel, as opposed to people, different demographics. And we don't know much about the long-term health effects. And I think this resolution is asking that we do that kind of review and evaluation, because even though, regardless of what we do with this ban, by banning CS gas, it's used nationwide in municipalities, or can be used. And this resolution also asks that all methods law enforcement use whenever there's escalating violence should be looked at carefully. To find something that's not going to be dangerous to the public. So that's what it is.
Okay. Thank you. And you'd like this to be a pass? You'd like to move forward with this on Monday, I'm assuming?
Yes, unless anyone has any other thoughts or anything they'd like to add.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, thank you.
Mike, your audio's kind of screwed up, but Mr. Johnson had his hand up, and then I'll go to you after that. Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I've been listening to the conversation from the public and, from the emails and the personal calls that I get. And one of the most frustrating things for me is that when the people speak in unison and clearly. I don't think that we've heard one person come up here and speak for the use of tear gas. And I don't understand why we have to do studies and have further conversation when, it's our job to react to the people. The people spoke loud and clear several times, and they're going to keep on speaking. This is one thing that if you go all across Albany, even in neighborhoods that it hasn't been used in, they feel strongly about it. And, I think that, we have an election coming up. We want people to get involved. We have to show them that we are listening to them when they speak directly to us. And I think that will go a long way. And, that's my feelings on it. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. O'Brien. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm willing to co-sponsor it. I don't think, I think bringing it to a study is a good idea. Doesn't have to necessarily, well, and the other issue is, I know we've had kind of a concerted effort of people bringing a message to us, but in my talking individually to people, I have talked to a lot of people who are uncertain about it and don't necessarily support a complete ban. But I think a study and a policy review, I don't see any harm in it. I'm willing to vote for this resolution.
Right, and we're requesting that, the upper levels of government can, partake in the study. So I think that's reasonable. Ms. Doche.
Oops, I didn't mean to put me, all right. So I'm a little stunned that this is not going to committee.
Go ahead, I'll listen, I'm sorry.
My legislation has been pending for 3 months. It was passed out of committee. I've asked for it to be put up for a vote. Why does this get put up for a vote when my legislation that was voted out of committee cannot be put up for a vote?
Well, this is a resolution. It's requesting action for state and federal officials to do something. It's not like we can make them do that or we have control over that. You're certainly smarter than I am. There's a big difference between this and banning the tear gas. But why don't we just get through the agenda, and then if you could say no, you could vote no. Are members comfortable with moving forward with a resolution requesting immediate action? If members don't want to do it, then we won't. But I really don't see the harm in it. It's requesting a study or evaluation. There's a big difference between that and banning the use of it. At least I think so. Mr. Ballard, did you want to say something?
I do. I really gotta get this computer stuff fixed. I'm sorry. I do understand the differences between the resolution and the Wall C. I think the optics of having one go for the other sends the wrong message. So I would say let's send them both together when we're at that point, because one is what we're looking to do here in the city, versus the other one is asking for clear guidance on the national level. And if you look and you read what different cities have done, all the different cities that have taken on the issue have had different elements to it, have had different structures to it. So, it's a difficult issue, and I think we should get some federal guidance on it. But I think, in the sense of, fairness, they should go together as whatever actions we as a city are going to take, and then what actions and clarity we would like the federal government to take, follow up on that.
Okay. So.
Well, Kelly, I mean, I'm comfortable holding off on this until we decide on the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Good. That helps a lot. All right, so that'll be an intro and hold. Yes, that's what we'll do. Next, we have an MC by Ms. O'Shea. You want to, for signados?
Yes. So the store has been closed through the pandemic because the signados are a little older, like my age, and high risk. And it's been an institution in the neighborhood for over 40 years. Family-owned business that they treat customers like family. Well established. They're part of the neighborhood, family, etc. So I think it's appropriate for us to honor them and recognize their retirement with this resolution.
Thank you. Members want to be co-sponsors, all members. I mean, they've been around for forever. We'll list this all as co-sponsors, please, Danielle, and that'll be a pass. Next, MC by Mr. Flynn. I know it probably got sent out late. I don't know if you want to throw it up. It's relating to support of Capitol holiday lights. You there, Mr. Flynn? I don't see him. Who is here? Where'd he go? Yep.
I think he had to leave.
That's convenient. So, all right. So it's like he'd like to add by majority consent, and the number is going to be 495221. Is that correct, Mr. Pichardo?
Yes, sir.
For a resolution, it's just a short resolution. I believe it got sent out a short time ago, expressing support for Capitol holiday lights in the park and them continuing to be there. That's going to be a referral to the Parks Committee because we need to have a further discussion on that. Considering, where we're at, the mayor made some recent comments about them no longer being in the park and being familiar with PAL. I know they try to get over in the park, around October to get set up. So if it's going to be canceled this year, it's got to be, that decision's got to be made now. I'm not in support of canceling, but we need to have the discussion, and we'll do it in the Parks and Rec Committee. Okay, yeah. So that'll be
just obviously this is not a non-controversial issue. So we need to make sure that people have an opportunity and that you hear some of the concerns.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Conti. Thank you for putting that up. Mr. Pichardo, okay, and so then next on to resolutions held. We've got resolution 334121R and 344121R by Ms. Farrell in Finance. They went through the committee and came out with positive recommendations. So we'll be moving those on Monday also.
So Kelly, on resolutions held, I'd like to also withdraw item 4, which is the permit parking home rule from last year. So that resolution is no longer, is kind of moot now and will be replaced by
With
the
a
new
new
one.
one.
So I'd like to just
Yep.
withdraw that.
Thank you, Mr. Conti. So that's it for the agenda. Before skipping or getting to local law C, I would just like to mention that we received that letter regarding the Albany Citizens Police Academy from the CPRB chair regarding the comments or the issues that she referred to as racist occurring. We're planning and scheduled a public safety meeting for the 27th of this month to discuss that issue and that curriculum there. So we'll take it up there. I have reached out and spoke to Ms. Vives at Lynn, as well as Commander Bacciolello from APD, and we'll be looking to get some of those folks in to be a part of this discussion. So with that, if no one has anything, we'll move on to discussion of local law C. Mr. Hoey.
No, I just want to talk about local law C. I understand there was a meeting put together. I'm one of the, I don't know what I'm called. I think it's a prime co-sponsor, and I was being excluded from the meeting. And I heard other members of the council who weren't even on this legislation. And from, I belong to the Common Council of Albany, not the Common Council of David Gallen, who seems to be manipulating how this council works. And I'm really very angry. And I'm going to be honest with you. I was looking for blood yesterday when I heard this. This is not how we should go as a council. We're elected officials. We're not appointed. And to be put out or being ignored, this is like how this works. And I'm disgusted. I'll be honest with you. Over the years, I've seen it. I've seen manipulation of our members by the administration and the staff of the administration, making us change our votes. And I don't know what's going on. You promise stuff that, we're going to give you a nice thing in your ward if you vote this way. I don't know. But it's just, the optics are very bad. And I'm upset. I had to get it off my chest, Kelly. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. I've been trying to get together and work through these issues. Let's not make it about Mr. Gallen. The thing is, remember, we have quorum issues. They're members of different committees of the council that can't all be in the same meeting without causing the issue of a quorum and forcing people out. So the folks that get to be in the room when the discussions are had, it wasn't intentional to leave you out. As a matter of fact, the prime sponsor, Ms. O'Shea, who happens to be on vacation, was invited to the meeting, but she couldn't take part because she's away. So it wasn't a secret meeting, and it wasn't a way to skirt, responsibility or any of that stuff. Again, when we do stuff like this, we can't all be there. Remember, each committee has 5 people on it, so 3 people constitute a quorum, and we're all in different committees. So that's how that happened. I apologize if you're offended, but it wasn't an intentional way to obfuscate and try to exclude people.
Ellie, I've gotten the phone calls from David. Okay, so I know it happens. I know I've talked to other members. It's just, maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe I'm naive because this is my first term, but I always thought we were grassroots. We're what the people on the grassroots want. And it shouldn't be top down where we're being told what the people want. It's from the bottom up. And, but maybe I'm naive, and I apologize if I am. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
I also think I think the real discussion it was always planned to be in public. There's a lot of different ideas, and I think Kelly was interested in getting some of those ideas together. So it certainly, I did not get any, I think Kelly just wants to move this forward in the best way possible. So we all deeply respect you, Tom. So I can promise you that there's not, and I as a council, this is something that we all have to weigh in on, and it should be done in public and it should be discussed in public. But we also, there's efficiencies and there was a lot of different pieces. So that was a way to kind of bring the pieces together. I don't think there was any expectation that that's like, actually, I mean, it'd be great if we all just agreed on everything and didn't have to dig back in, but our track record isn't that, so, which is good. That's why we're here. But I appreciate you bringing it up.
Right, so. So, yeah, so. Okay, so, so a version that we worked on and for the folks in the room, the members that participated were myself, Ms. Farrell, Mr. Conti, Mr. Ballerin, Mr. O'Brien, and who else? There were like 5 of us, Conti, Ballerin.
O'Shea?
Yeah, well, yeah. So, yeah. So with that being said, we came up with some changes. The members get a chance to review the changes. Is that a no?
Yes.
Any thoughts? And again, if members, go ahead, Ms. O'Shea, go ahead.
So I thought the chief was going to be here tonight.
Yeah, we had a discussion and determined that it wouldn't be productive. So we're just here as the council discussing this stuff.
We did, so one of the concerns that was brought up that I personally think is valid is having the chief here. It is important to get information from the police, which was one of the reasons why we asked Mr. Gallen to be here. Although I have to say I love the Common Council of David Gallen. I think that's hilarious. But he said that he would be able to kind of be a conduit of any questions we might have and see if he can get them answered by, so there are police staff that are ready and willing to answer questions. And if there's an interest, I believe that we can have them actually come into the meeting. But I think I at least thought it was a valid point to, there's a lot of different sides to this, and perhaps common council members talking and utilizing police as information, but more as an informational piece.
So I asked that question because last I knew, that was going to be a major part of this. Questions were prepared for him, or we were asked to prepare questions for him. I'm finding it very discouraging on my legislation to constantly be sitting in meetings and finding out at those meetings what has been decided that is different than what I had any clue was going to be happening. And okay, so now we all know that the discussion is not with the chief. The discussion is about the proposed draft that people were provided with at noon today. I have lots of questions about the draft. But I think we need to go back to a year ago when people raised concerns about the use of tear gas. This wasn't something we raised concerns about, although I think a lot of us were concerned about it, so much as the public was raising concerns about it. And we've had meetings about it. We had more meetings, and I thought it was pretty obvious that we should be having a ban on tear gas based upon that. But I waited for the results of the police reform collaborative. And it didn't surprise me that the recommendation to ban it appears in 2 different places. I understand that people are talking about the fact that one of those groups of people that was responsible for talking about community relations was not supposed to address this issue. Well, I think that they failed to follow the marching orders from the mayor's office that they got apparently when they were handpicked for this organization to serve on this. I think when you're talking about community relations, it would be hypocrisy for people to not be talking about the need to demilitarize our police. And that is at the core of getting rid of tear gas as an option. It is a weapon. As for anybody, I really hope people were able to watch Helen Gunn's interview, Dorsey Pleer's interview with Helen Gunn, city council member from Philadelphia. But she says, our neighborhoods are not war zones. They shouldn't be treated like war zones, and our residents, our citizens should not be treated like combatants. The fact is that 2 of the criteria that are in this legislation for the use of tear gas, the use of an EMT and giving notice to people, are policies that currently exist within the department. Policies that the police department did not follow last year when they used tear gas. So that's 2 of the 4 that we're talking about. Then we can talk about one of the criteria is riot. Well, we've heard the police chief use that term repeatedly, including for a small gathering of people outside the South Street station. We were all here when he came in and he defended the actions of police officer grabbing a megaphone out of somebody's hands, somebody falling to the ground, justifying, all that action and referring to it as a riot. So now we know that essentially any gathering of people constitutes a riot as far as the police chief is concerned. So the other criteria here says something about, and there's no alternative, and we are supposed to trust. Let me bring this up. No alternative to enable the police force, the Albany Police Department, to, quote, secure the safety of people in the immediate vicinity. So that's the only thing that is kind of like a little new in the criteria, aside from the ones that the police have already ignored that exist, and the use of the term riot easily to describe any gathering that makes the police feel uncomfortable and would justify the use of tear gas. So to secure the safety of people in the immediate vicinity is void for vagueness. What does safety mean? I did a lot of protecting of my kids when they were growing up. When I drive an automobile, I'm supposed to do it in a safe manner. Are we protecting people against tripping and falling? Or are we protecting them against potential fatal injuries? what is meant by this. It provides nothing in the way of assurances. The reason why I think a complete ban is appropriate is because I'm listening to the conversations and realizing that the police have ignored our existing criteria. I'm sorry, somebody's trying to call me. Ignored the existing criteria, they'll ignore other criteria. The protection against First Amendment rights. I don't know what that adds. If it's a riot, but somebody's exerting their First Amendment rights, well, that trumps all. So you can use tear gas. The protecting, using it in residential areas, again, when where is it? Unless the police chief or deputy on site determines the use is absolutely necessary to protect lives. Now, I understand that lawyers are drafting this, but that is not a term that I've seen appear generally in legislation when you are adopting specific criteria that is supposed to be limiting. We can talk about government needing to protect the health, safety, and welfare of residents, but then the Constitution and case law goes on to limit what that means. So I appreciate the work that went into this. I want to note that one of the things that Mr. Kimbrough has said to me is that while he agreed with the initial use of tear gas, he had a problem with its continued use with people going into alleys, etc. And when and this was the first time I knew that he, like 2 months ago, that he was working on changes, potential amendments. And I said, how are you going to deal with that? That's one of those issues. It goes everywhere. Once you authorize the police to use something, where is the discipline? One of the things that Helen Gunn has said is that when people are in stressful situations, and I can completely understand this, you use bad judgment. You use bad judgment. So we have the mayor in a stressful situation, equating what happened at South Street to, a riot going on, an insurrection at the Capitol. She retracted that. However, she hasn't retracted the statements in her press release that I think are dangerous, I think, to basically say to the public, if there was an attack on the city hall, the only choice the police would have if they couldn't use tear gas is to do nothing or lethal force. And I think that when we are talking about policing in the city of Albany and all of the problems that we have, for somebody to say that the police's choice is to do nothing or use lethal force is, it's beyond me. It brings tears to my eyes because in some cases we know that that is what has happened.
Thank you.
When maybe restraint should be used. I do want to bring people's attention to the NAACP comments. They are eloquent comments. They are concise. They are talking about the lack of trust. The events of the past year have created a situation of deteriorating trust in our police force. Against the backdrop of these past events, such as those related to the death of Dante Ivy and the shooting of Elazar Williams, the use of tear gas and recent treatment of protesters on Arch Street, trust in the capacity of APD to responsibly interact with Black and Brown residents of Albany has moved towards a total collapse. She then goes on to talk about the trust issue involved in people speaking out about tear gas and the desire to ban tear gas. People speaking out, people participating in the Police Reform Collaborative and speaking out. And those recommendations becoming part of that report. The plan and the plan incorporated the call for a ban on tear gas. Nevertheless, both the APD and the mayor have clearly stated their opposition to Local Law C, which is intended to operationalize that recommendation. The plan calls for numerous other actions regarding policing in Albany. Many of them need to be carried out by the APD. It is with significant alarm that we see the APD choosing to object to this provision. It portends the APD in future situations ignoring the plan requirements. And this should this be the case, there is no mandate to the plan, and there is little reform the public can rely on. The APD should not be able to unilaterally make such choices. The move to ban the use of tear gas is a small but critical step in the process to demilitarize the APD and to respond passionately to the passionately expressed will of the people. And she asked the council to pass this. Helen Gunn also talked about the impact of them passing the ban in Philadelphia. And she talked about how essentially the level of trust was missing. And how can people believe in public safety if they can't trust the police? I thought that was a great question to be asked. And she said essentially that when they passed this, when they listened to residents and they passed it, the ban, it began to build a bridge towards rebuilding that public trust and allowing them to move towards a bigger view of justice. If they didn't do it, she said, it would have caused further breach of the public trust. And that's why I think we should be acting on this on Monday, and we should be passing this on Monday. I think having passed this as part of the plan, having had the mayor not pull it out and massage it before she put forward a plan, saying we're going to enact these reforms as is, I think we owe it to the public. I don't know how we regain trust of the public if we don't enact this ban, no less the police department. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and just before I open up, I mean, folks have heard what I think and you think. I'd like to hear from more folks, but I just have a question. Just so, what are your thoughts on the Philadelphia legislation? You mentioned Dorsey's podcast or what have you. Jude, I'm asking you, Judy.
So I have looked at that legislation. We have a situation in which two of the criteria in our own legislation, our police department has ignored. I think that tells us what we can expect if they are allowed to use tear gas. If you listen to the interview, you would have heard the city legislator say that she favored a complete ban. She was disappointed that that was not an option there that could pass. And she expressed grave reservations about how some of the provisions of their legislation are going to be interpreted and whether or not they're going to be obeyed by the Philadelphia police. So I have the same concerns.
Okay. Jenny?
I just wanted to kind of walk people through some of the conversations that were had with the legislation that was sent out. What I would say is these are conversations. I appreciate Judy leading the charge on this, and I know that Kelly and David really wanted her there. Fortunately, Judy is working really hard on the USDO, so we appreciate her being there. So we actually began with the Philly legislation. To be clear, Philly did not ban tear gas. JR just sent Philly's legislation out, we began with that. And we had a conversation to say, I mean, we could actually just pass that. If Philly is saying that they can't ban tear gas, we could do the same thing and say, hey, we did the same thing as Philly. We also banned tear gas, but it doesn't actually ban tear gas. So we actually started with a Philly piece and went further than that. Because the thing is, it shouldn't be a surprising situation where everybody thinks you have a tear gas ban, but then suddenly you're in this situation and tear gas is used and everybody's wondering why you're using tear gas because they thought it was banned. So we led with their piece that is the kind of the teeth of it. So if in your email, JR sent out to everyone everyone will. No, I printed it out and I have all these piles of paper that is not helpful. But the same, very similar language that says the department, so you'll see in the city of Philadelphia, the teeth of it is really the department shall establish a written policy or update any relevant existing policy to prohibit the use of chemical weapons and kinetic energy munitions by any member of the department on an individual engaging in First Amendment activities. So that was something, if you go actually to the legislation that we started with. And that was one of the pieces that was a pretty important piece to say that absolutely not. If somebody's engaging in First Amendment rights, that should not happen. We also talked about some of the pieces that were not okay, specifically in that differentiation between that first and second night. So is it May 29th and 3rd? People are better with the dates than I am, but I think everybody knows exactly what I mean. Where that second night was wrong, and we need to legislate that. I think that there is absolutely no doubt in that. It was horrifying. And so discussing making sure that you do not go through a neighborhood. However, I will say Councilmember Love brought up some valid points. If there is a safety issue, I think many council members or neighborhoods would prefer, if you are concerned about your actual safety, that something's going to happen to you in your house. There might be a situation where tear gas is preferable. But it should be a life and death situation. Tear gas does not belong going through neighborhoods. I look, and a lot of what I deal with in day to day is sometimes we're in situations where things are an opportunity. So we have this very important piece of legislation, but we also have an entire police collaborative reform process to go through. And one of the things, I talked about a precedent with the school district. Precedents are really important things to set because, and to be careful of not setting. And I do think that having a process that we're able to set up where there's actually some sort of immediate evaluation of a police action is a very strong, important precedence. And I don't think there's anything like that in the United States. And I think it's way stronger than anything that Philly has on the books. So so having, if there is tear gas used, that there is a report within 5 business days that is given to the Public Safety Committee, which is charged with meeting and reviewing this report. The chief of police and whoever, so the chief and the deputy chiefs are given the ability to make the decision. So if the chief is not the decision maker, then that deputy chief would go with them to be interviewed in a public meeting. I think that it's one of the things that is just an important piece to talk about when we talk about precedent, because longer term, I think that we need to start talking about this kind of thing when it comes to policing more often, that there needs to be some sort of evaluation of police activities that is a public, non-police, it's a civilian evaluation of what happened. And this gives a function for that. So that's just kind of some of the processes that went through. Anyone is welcome to join in, weigh in, but I just wanted to kind of share that.
You trying to get in, Mr. Johnson, to speak?
I mean, I just would like to make a comment to Councilwoman Farrell's. The public doesn't have trust in the police APD being able to have that authority. I think that they've already shown that, you know, they abused that authority in the past, and to say that, you know, they're going to have to report in 5 days. There's a whole bunch of situations that already exist that they don't do. You know, it doesn't happen the way that it's written up or is expected to. So, you know, to continue this conversation and say, what we're going to put it right back in their hands is definitely not what the community is looking for. So
I agree. It's something that was discussed, and I think you brought up different ideas. This is the opportunity for it. This thing that was sent out, that was a coalition of all of the different ideas that were thrown around. It doesn't have to happen. We can do anything we want. And I think you've talked about this a lot. I think it's a really valid point.
I think that we should, our expectation from our police officers it should be a professional conduct. It'll be de-escalation, it'll be, you know, making true relationships that when the height like that, and when we're in tense situations, those relationships kick in. But if you just have a police department that, you know, walks around with army fatigues on, you know, a lot of times in scenarios in certain neighborhoods, you're never going to foster those type of relationships. So I just hear a lot of relying off of, you know, using tools and not relying off of relationships. You know, Albany is a historically relationship rich town. And, you know, I think that once we start doing things and sending clearer messages to the people, we'll see these relationships once again start playing, factoring in these tense situations. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. O'Brien?
Yeah, you know, one of the questions which I have regarding the Albany Police Department, not too many years ago, we got awards for having a strong community policing police department under Caucus and Brendan Cox. And then it just seemed to suddenly fall apart. I mean, we now are, what, 85 officers short, and community policing has been drawn down from, what, 38 positions to about 14. So I guess when people refer to I mean, obviously they fell short back last summer. They did things they shouldn't have done. But do we, I don't know, kind of like basically react as to how we're going to handle our police department based on what they did in 2020 rather than what they used to be? And shouldn't we really be looking at why have they spiraled down both in personnel and in philosophy in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years? I mean, that's something which I think we should be actively looking at rather than just banning them from doing certain things, because at least my impression is once upon a time, we trusted them more and maybe they were led better. Just my thought.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Johnson.
Yes, I just would say, one of the, a good starting point is just to follow the chest cams. When the chest cams came, a lot of people left after it was mandatory that officers had to wear them. If you look at it, I think that it's a strong connection. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoey and then Ms. Farrell.
Sure. You know, Kelly, I just want to comment, and my anger is kind of subsided, but the people that you mentioned were at that meeting. I don't know there was any pro banning. A lot of the people had spoken out against banning. So I'm a little bit, now if I was at that meeting, one of the suggestions, instead of having a chief give a report, or I would have said, why doesn't the mayor be the one to make that call to release the tear gas or not? The buck has to stop somewhere. As Truman said, the buck stops at his desk. So, you know, if they're pushing that they want to keep tear gas, why aren't we saying, okay, the responsibility then, if that tear gas is released, it's yours, Mr. Mayor. You know, to me, it makes sense. Having it beneath you that, well, it could be the deputy commander or it could be this one or that one, you know, you're kind of pushing off the responsibility. And this is a serious thing in this community. And I've seen the responses from people. I've heard them at the meetings, and that's what I try to bring out. You know, look at the number of people speaking for the ban and those against it. And, you know, the bottom line is the public record. I've heard that, well, people are afraid to speak up. Well, there is, you know, I could say there's a silent majority that's saying we really need to ban it and we're afraid to speak up. I mean, the reality is we're here right now as a council and talking about what we're going to do on Monday night. And, you know, I have my name as a co-sponsor on that bill. And I don't know, I don't think it's possible for me to get my name off if it's changed. I was happy the way it came out of committee. You know, I want to bring up one more point that I hadn't in the past. Actually, I got 2 points I want to bring up. The first one, Kelly, we were there on June 1st, me and you. They knocked it, well, and I wasn't there the day, the 30th, which was 2 days previous. As soon as they hit that tear gas, people dispersed. And I think in this case, on the 1st, we were lucky because they didn't reband and go berserk like they did on the 30th. On the 30th, you had roving bands of people who were ticked off. They had gotten gassed and, you know, they were angry to begin with, and we dispersed them. And they went up as far as cross gates, breaking windows, breaking into stores on Central Avenue. We didn't keep them one spot. We threw tear gas. So my question is to all of you, and I don't want an answer here, but think about it. How did that help the situation? It protected, you know, the station, but look at the damage that it did to the neighborhood, and not only the city of Albany's neighborhood, but Colony's neighborhood also. And the second thing, I wanted to keep my mouth shut, but sometimes you just can't. There's a member on this council whose child, and I want to say child, but, you know, teenager, was there on June 1st and was gassed. And I don't know if the member of the council realizes that their child, who we want to protect, we talked about it with the school board, that we're here. You know, if I found out my son Max got gassed, I'd be pissed. I'd be pissed that he was there, but, well, if it was a good reason and it was a, you know, it was a protest and you're allowed to protest, that's one thing. But to get gassed and to be crying on the street, you know, this, we're talking about our children. For the members of the council who have children or who will have children. I mean, we got to think about what's going on. But just want to go back. I think the responsibility lays at the top with the mayor's office. And, you know, if they want to release gas, that should be the responsibility. That should be the person making the call. Thank you.
Ms. Farrell, was that from before?
Oh, no, I had it up again. I wouldn't mind having the mayor in as the decision maker. I also, I mean, I think that we could just use, if I mean, Judy was talking a lot about the benefits of the Philly legislation. We could move forward with that. I think that we should internally understand it's not actually a ban on tear gas, but if that's another option to actually just use what Philly did. So.
I just need to jump in here. I don't know how anybody got that I was talking about the benefits of the Philadelphia legislation. Don't know how anybody got that. I was talking about the benefits of listening to the conversation with the council member.
Kelly, I just wanted to respond to some of Derek's comments. Derek, you know, I agree with you completely that those relationships you establish between the police and the public are so incredibly important. And Mike said this too, you know, for many years, there's a lot of us who have worked really hard to you know, have a very strong community policing program. And I understand what you're saying is that that didn't necessarily happen in all neighborhoods. And it's just for someone who's felt so strongly about it over these years, it is frustrating, really frustrating that, you know, our community policing has actually, you know, it seems like it's gone downhill. We don't have the same numbers, but I totally agree with you. It's those relationships that are critical. And you know, if our community policing had been allowed to continue and grow and so on and so forth that we worked so hard on, you know, we might have been able to rely on those relationships in both those situations where tear gas was used. So that you de-escalate. And, you know, that didn't happen. Where part of it is that we are nationwide, you know, that kind of community policing and that we've been striving for has not happened. And the tragedies that happened nationwide, you know, just spilled right over here. And that's not to say we haven't had our horrible incidents also, but you know, it's extremely frustrating because I think we were on the right track and we've gotten totally derailed because of what's going on nationally. So I do think that regardless of what we do here with tear gas, we've got to get back to that building relationships because it is so very critical. And you know, I'm just going to put it out there. This is a really, really tough issue for me personally. And I'm pretty torn about it because you know, I'm in favor of demilitarizing the police. Absolutely. But I am concerned about, you know, really bad situations where people, for whatever reason, not talking about the peaceful protesters, I'm talking about people who are, you know, become out of control and put others' lives at risk. So I'm torn about this. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Conti, Mr. Ballerin, and then Mr. O'Shea.
Thanks. So I find this all very frustrating and I don't know, difficult discussion. Probably, you know, one of the most in my 20 some odd years on this council. And we've had a lot, and it's not the first time we've dealt with police community relations during my time on the council. And I'm to piggyback on some of Councilmember Fahey's remarks, I think, one of the frustrations also does go back to the whole movement that I thought at one point we were really making good progress in terms of community policing and building community relations. And I really credit Chief Krokoff for beginning that process, and Chief Cox for continuing it, and Chief Sears for attempting to continue to. And I think Chief Sears had some particular challenges when he was in charge. And it does seem like we've lost that, or not lost it, but we have some setbacks here. And I think part of it does relate to this, for whatever reason, significant shortfall in staffing, which makes it really difficult, I think, in part, to put in place proactive policies that build relationships and look at creativity in terms of how do we deal with the community and how do we deal with problems in a more sensitive way, as opposed to a police response on some of these issues which we talked about. So then going back to the collaborative and the governor's executive order, that was meant to give localities the option, the opportunity, the responsibility to develop plans and look at these issues in a holistic approach, rather than, picking issues or different issues and not seeing how those different pieces, fit into the larger puzzle. As far as police reform or reinvention or whatever you want to call it. And so that was supposed to be the collaborative, and we can, in terms of the collaborative initiative that we had and the report that they submitted to us, we can complain about, some of the shortfalls or the format, or does it tie into a vision or a narrative, et cetera, but can't dismiss that it is a comprehensive set of recommendations and strategies that need to be looked at in a holistic way. And I will note that the administration has put out an RFP to begin to implement portions of that collaborative report that deal with, the standing orders and operating procedures, et cetera. So there's real movement now in terms of moving forward on that. So we are doing things as far as trying to make some reforms, reinvention, doing the things we need to do, not to discount some of the earlier moves the council took. And, we've been talking about the recommendation on tear gas out of the collaborative. And so we'll say there are two recommendations. They are different, but I don't know that they are necessarily contradictory. The one recommendation that came from the committee that was actually charged with looking at this was to place restrictions on the use, including the use in neighborhoods and residential areas, and to put in place a policy. I don't have it in front of me, a policy that also looks at de-escalation and things of that nature. The other one that came from the other committee was to set as a goal the elimination of tear gas. So they're not contradictory in a sense. Placing restrictions and trying then to move toward that goal, can be a complementary path moving forward. So, and as I say, I struggle with this issue just the way Kathy does, in terms of where I would like to go and what I would like to see now, as opposed to how do we get to where we want consistent with an overall plan moving forward, and how it fits into a bigger picture. So, from that perspective, I think it would be consistent with the collaborative report as far as this, and moving forward, is to look at how can we begin to place in the restrictions and the policy and the guardrails around the use that provides some of the safeguards that we need. And I think that what this draft attempts to do is that. And then as we do that, to continue to move forward and look at how do we look at issues in terms of, if we want to say banning or demilitarization, continue that discussion on a longer term basis to get to where we want to get. But there is a short term goal to get to a certain point, and the longer term goal, I think we need to look at some of that. No one supports the use of tear gas. No one is advocating the use of tear gas. Everyone, there's consensus to move forward on either its elimination or restrictions. But again, I don't think there's an inconsistency in moving forward on placing guardrails and restrictions and accountability standards on the use, and limiting the circumstances where it might happen, and still continuing to try to move forward on the ultimate goal of, want to call ban or demilitarization or issues like that. So, as I say, I'm struggling with this issue. It would be very easy to say ban. I think we need to really, there are a lot of factors that need to be thrown in. And it's not, and that's why, we have a added responsibility to, as elected officials, part of our responsibility is to think through these issues in a way that are workable, that are sensitive, and takes into account a lot of the issues that we've been dealing with. So maybe my remarks are all over because my head's all over. So, but those are my thoughts in terms of, where I am on this issue right now.
Thank you, Mr. Conti. Mr. Ballerin.
Okay, I think I got it right this time. Everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. This is a tough issue, and I think we're having that conversation. I think it's good that we're having this conversation, and it's not an easy issue at all. One, I do think we should go beyond what Philly did. I don't think we should just say that, we're banning tear gas and pat ourselves on the back, but in reality, that's not the case. I think, that's not, the route we should take. I think we should take a route that's very specific, very direct, that does not have too much ambiguity. I also think we have to be very cautious with the word riot, because it's a word that sparks a lot of emotions, and it's a word that, who is saying that versus, the actions and the situation of the on the ground. And I think sometimes it even, using that word can minimize some effects that may have happened before. I think, I've been very open about this. I was there that Saturday night on May 30th. I saw the very difficult situation that people were under. I saw, right in front of me, the tractor trailer being hijacked. So, it was a very different scenario than what happened that Monday. And it was very different people. I think that's really a critical point of who was there that Monday versus who was there that Saturday. Because that Monday, you had a lot more people from the neighborhoods, a lot more people from our communities, students that I have worked with in the past, students that I was proud that were there. Tom, I know you said you'd be mad at your son, but I bet you wouldn't. Just like you were there, and I don't think you'd be upset that he was there, or he was at any protest, on any issue that he believes in. And I didn't leave until I knew that one of my former students, whose friend actually got hit with a rubber bullet, was in their car on home safe. So that should have never happened. You know, that was preventable. I truly believe, you know, if we would have had more officers on the other side to have seen the difference in the crowd, the difference in the fury, I think that could have been prevented. And I know fireworks were thrown at the police. I was there. The worst part about that is the individual who threw the fireworks sped up on a dirt bike up the road, and he didn't deal with the consequences, or he or she didn't deal with the consequences of their actions. We had to breathe that gas. We had to see our neighborhoods get, you know, get hit. So I think we have to have this difficult conversation. I think we can't be afraid of it. I think, you know, I'm glad we're finally having it. And I know we've been having it. I know we've been having it informally as well. You know, I've spoken to other council members, and I know this is a tough issue. You know, my recommendation would be to remove the word riot, you know, from any kind of document where this is, and have very specific, very specific definitions. And I think we need to have that conversation, you know, about what it is. Because I looked at what San Francisco's got an exemption if, you know, individuals are attacking officers or other individuals. Berkeley said if there was an immediate threat. So I think we should, you know, make it stronger than what others have done, but also we gotta have something in there to make sure that command staff, because this is command staff, to make sure individuals know, you know, you can't just chase people. You know, we can't just chase people with this. You know, that this is if this is going to be used, it needs to be used to save lives, to prevent harm, and not to move people along. But I look forward to the conversation, and I'm willing to stay as long as the night has us, you know, in trying to have this conversation about this issue.
Maybe we ought to just go around the table once and say, what would people say that they would do, okay? If there were, whatever word you want to give it, some incendiary gathering or whatever, how would you try to end it? Not tear gas. Do you want them to go in with the batons and this and that, or might maybe end up with a lethal weapon? You know, I remember a few years ago, the mayor stayed at a city in City Hall, and we're all sitting down, first time we had it in the rotunda, and little did we know that protesters, okay, were hanging out all day in the bathrooms and everything else. All of a sudden, dropped down signs and everything, came in to shut down everything. The mayor was very cool about it. She stopped, and then this went on back and forth. And they gave her a little quiet, started up again. But then you know what they did? And I thought it was going to get bad. They started walking in between our chairs on my feet and everything. And you know what, that day? I said, this could have went bad. You know what the cops did then? They stood the ground. They just sat there, whatever, stood around and let them do their thing, and it wore out. But, you know, they were some years ago. Things are different in the country right now. And there's a lot of frustration on everybody's side. I know the cops are very frustrated, okay, because they're down so many cops, okay? They're working 18-hour days, 18 hours a day, going home trying to see their kids. There's a lot on both sides of this thing. But something, we have to have some alternative. That's what I want, okay? I don't know, I just got some things late today from JR. Massachusetts has some, it's a little bit different. There's different cities. I haven't had a chance to read them. Maybe they're all different, but we have to know what we're going to do when something happens. If something
Right.
big happens, I want to be protected. I want to protect the people there. You know, you just watch the news. Look at what's going on in Jerusalem, okay? And that man, they're throwing tear gas like there's firecrackers, and there's two sides really. I mean, they're at war. You know, they don't declare it, whatever. And I told you this before. I lived in Northern Ireland. I was there for Bloody Sunday. I had roommates that were hurt up there, okay? And in that instance, there were the Protestants and the Catholics, okay? There's a lot of hatred going back to the 1600s, all right? Who had to get in the middle of that, okay, was the military, paramilitary, whatever they call themselves. The most of them sided one way. But they were trying to keep two sides apart. When it started, then they turned on everybody else. But there's occasions like that when you're trying to separate two people and the cops could be in the middle or anybody else. And as they tried to say when they explained the tear gas is used to try to de-escalate the issue, okay? They said the first time it was thrown off, they were here and there, and they said if that tear gas, if it was used right, and maybe not so much, it would have given space in between the crowds, maybe calm things down. Did it? I mean, it kept some people from getting hurt bad, I think, you know? And there's a lot of people out there in today's world that just have hate. Hate. I see more of it, okay? We all do. And you have to be prepared for hateful people, what they're going to do, and be able to stop them. And sometimes not lethally. That's all. But everybody think of how they would stop it. That's what I'd like to hear.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Igo. I'll get right to you, Mr. O'Shea. But I think we keep improperly stating that we're going from do nothing to lethal force. That's not what the chief said, and that's not what I said either. It's do nothing or no, Mr. I got you, Mr. Igo. Thank you. The do nothing or lethal force. The lethal force argument comes after there's some kind of interaction where the police try to correct a behavior that's going on and a fight ensues or there's an issue. It's not do nothing or lethal force. There's something in between. There's an interaction. But with that, I'll stop talking. Mr. O'Shea, Mr. Hoey, and then Mr. Gallen, and thank you.
So I will get to the comment why I raised my hand in just a second, but I do want to say that my position is we should be having conversations now well in advance of the next protest in the community with people who are protesting, understanding that they have every reason to be protesting. And let's figure this out so we don't get to the point where things are erupting like this. And we are in a cycle at this point that is very disconcerting. The reason why I raised my hand is I'm trying to let everybody else have an opportunity. But when I have a difference of opinion with regard to, when I think that we need to be seeing some of the issues clearly, I feel the need to speak up. So I think I heard essentially a comment that suggested that people are mostly protesting what is going on elsewhere. And there's a lot of bad that's been going on elsewhere. It has gotten a lot of press, but people have every right to protest what is going on here in the city of Albany. Things are happening and there is not enough being done to address things, to look at what is happening. Frankly, I think admitting when they're wrong. And we all make mistakes. Starting to look at those mistakes, but to look at, in the last 5 years, we've had Dante Ivey and Elazar Williams, two real tragedies. Those are real. we read about, we see the videos on social media about people being kneeled on, people being beaten, people being gassed and pulled by their collar and thrown on the floor. I want to make sure that this council and everybody else knows, you've seen the city auditor's report about Albany policing. 20 cases settled for civil rights violations in the last 5 years. Those are the ones that have settled. There's another 20 that are still pending. Those 20 that have settled have cost the city taxpayers $1.2 million in the last 5 years. The ones that are still pending have the potential to bankrupt us. And if we don't address these issues now, even more reason for there to be punitive damages, for us not taking much more assertive action with regard to what is going on in the city. I understand the desire to deal with things in a process. I went through a process with the USDO. Here we are 4 years later, we haven't done our 6-month review. It makes me anxious when we have a very difficult situation here in the city with people upset because police are not sitting down at the table because of the way the police department interacts with Black and brown people. So it's here. And the other thing I want to say about this is the question that I have with regard to the use of tear gas is, and I wasn't there, but I do wonder how much of it is being used to protect people and how much of it is being used to protect buildings, material items, and the police themselves, partially because the leadership is not sitting down and not proactively addressing the very legitimate concerns. So I just want $1.2 million in 5 years over 20 settled civil rights lawsuits and 20 more civil rights lawsuits pending, some of which we know are going to cost the city money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I just want to address Councilman Igo's comment that, that it's religion in Northern Ireland. It's not, it's jobs. And, you have to be a certain religion to get a job. My aunt came to this country back in the 30s, and there was signs up, Irish need not apply. So, it's not, you don't have to be just Black or brown. Our society seems to target certain people. But I do want to ask Councilman Igo and you, Pro Temp Kimbrough, I need an answer to this. On the May 30th, tear gas was used to disperse the crowd. And what happened? The crowd went off, and that's why it hit all the papers. The crowd went off, broke windows all the way up Central Avenue in different streets, and like I said before, to cross gates. So how did that help the situation? It just angered people, and it made them go on the loose. And what will we do if we have another crowd like that? I think the crowd on the 30th was a lot larger than the crowd on June 1st that we were at. So, I don't think that it's a silver bullet there that we're going to use tear gas to disperse the crowd and they're going to go home and be happy. No, I mean, it's going to just open up Pandora's box. And I do have a question. I could not find the email with the changes. I just went through it during this meeting. Are rubber bullets being banned in this continuing to be banned? And that's a question. So I have two questions for you, Kelly, and one for Joe.
Yeah, so on the destruction, the path of destruction, the police didn't chase those folks out of Albany or up and make that happen. That was going to happen anyway. It was happening all over the country. Them going to Guilderland or up Washington. That people are angry. People are upset at lost lives, the maltreatment of folks of color. To Judy's point, again, George Floyd and any other people that have died at the hands of police. Our version of that is Elazar Williams. It is Dante Ivey. You look at Clay Gustav, who was the CPRB chair that got involved with the interaction or altercation with the police. That people don't forget. I think the trust issue arises, things happen. There's some untruthfulness on the part of, the police department, which just fuels the fire. I mean, it's no mystery that we're here, but fact of the matter is, the world was on fire during that time. That was going to happen. Those folks were going up there, and again, it's pent up anger and frustration. And again, my experience with the police is a lot different from some of these other folks. I mean, the day-to-day interactions for some folks with police are fairly negative, and it's impactful. And me, I've had some of my own bad experiences with police, and again, to sit here, I mean, it's sometimes saddens me to think about it, and then at other times it makes me angry and I want to hurt someone. So I can see how some of those folks feel, but we got to work through this because it's the destruction isn't helpful for our communities, nor is the anger. So we got to come together and try to work through these issues. So that was that. And then what was your other question?
I just want to go back to that. If we didn't use the tear gas, would they have dispersed, or would they have stayed there and continued in a smaller area where we could have done something?
What do you? Where the truck got set on fire and windows were being broken?
Yeah.
You're saying we should have just let them continue?
No. Why didn't we? We could have called in the National Guard. We could have done something more. State police, something like that. What we did was dispersed it, and it just went out and spread. That's my opinion.
It was going to spread anyways, but in my opinion, the thing is, and to Mr. Igo's point about tear gas being a de-escalation tool, the thing is, in most instances, and again, we're not talking about this lengthy history of, I mean, we are talking about a lengthy history of bad things happening, police abuses and the like. But the tear gas use, we're talking like there's this long history of the Albany Police Department misusing it. We're talking about 2 instances last year, which again, I agree with the use in time when it began, but the way it continued and spread out was just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And again, maybe that's being in both of those situations and having the experience I have. I agree with the initial uses, but the spreading out was just unacceptable and was problematic. It absolutely was. But you asked me another question.
Yeah, I wanted to find out about, are rubber bullets still being banned in this legislation?
Again, yeah, it speaks to it not being able to be used against people exercising their First Amendment rights. Yeah. So yeah, it is.
Okay. Well, and again, I'm kind of worried when you put that little caveat in. I was there. I wasn't protesting, but I was with people protesting, and some bad guys got involved and made it seem like everybody was the bad guy. So, how do we prevent it? It's what started as a peaceful protest. How do we protect those people who are there peacefully? I don't see why, again, my name is on there, and I understand I can't take it off because it came out of committee, as a prime co-sponsor.
Right. So you realize that change that went out last, this thing that we're talking about, it's merely a proposal at this point. As Ms. Doche put forth and amended it, that's what's in play right now. We're trying to discuss making some changes to it. So what you agreed on and what you were pushing and supported before, that's what, if we move forward, that's what we'd be voting on, not the new thing. But again, as a practical matter, I mean, there's a lot of stuff and comments being thrown out. Like you, for instance, said, why didn't the police intermingle on the other side, up on the first, up by headquarters? It's dangerous. It's not. You saw the reaction to Mr. Ballerin, and he was being polite and trying to support those, some of the folks that were there. You mix police into that, plain clothes or otherwise, I think it's a recipe for disaster. And again, in both instances, probably for 10, there may have been less than 1 out of 10 bad actors in each of those nights, both downtown and uptown. But when bad actors are interspersed and intermingled with people that are just standing around, how do you manage that? It's tough. It's easy for us to sit here now and discuss this like I mean, this isn't TV, this is the real world, and those interactions are not as simple as everyone thinks they are. And so that's where I'm coming from, and that's why I've been pushing the way I've been pushing on this. So again,
well, I just want to say that I was talking to the protesters and they wanted to talk to Officer Cantor. And I went over, I got Officer Cantor, and he came over and was talking to him. And that's when, unfortunately, the fireworks started. Now, with the gentleman that went after Alfredo, he almost went after me. He had issues. I mean, I think there was definite issues there, not because of the situation, but I think personally, I'm going to just say it. He seemed very unstable to me and stuff like that.
There were a few.
Yeah. But, and I had a long talk with Council President Corey, and, he's talking about maybe having a peace type of group that would work under the department that would mingle with people. We need to be able to get people, you go out there with military gear, and shields and helmets, and that's what they were yelling when I got down there. Take off the shield, take off that, come and talk to us. Now, if somebody would have done that, would they have jumped all over and beat them up? I would hope not. But, we need to get to a point that we're not at war. And it feels like a civil war to me. I mean, that's how the whole situation seems. And, the whole idea is we want to diffuse this. And what's the best way? And, there is no easy answer. That's why we're here. It's, almost 9 o'clock. But I'm willing to be here till 2 in the morning if we can come up with some kind of solution. So thank you.
Yeah, and before I let Mr. Galen speak, and the thing is, a couple of members have said it and mentioned the way things used to be with our community policing, and we had the trust of the community, and I mean, we're past that point. Some things have happened over the years, and quite frankly, I mean, I could see this coming. But we're where we're at now, so we got to work through it. But it's not going to get better without the police getting together with the community and setting some ground rules and coming up with some solutions and agreeing to disagree. But the maltreatment has to stop. Not every community member is a bad guy or up to no good, but by the same token, not every police officer is. I mean, again, there are good police officers mixed into that fray when things go wrong, and they're more good than bad, just like with the community. You got a few people, bad apples, that make it tough, and so we gotta work through it. And so I'll Mr. Galen or Galen, you want to say something, and then we'll finish up.
Sorry, there was a lot of feedback. I just wanted to say, well, first off, thank you for, I know this has been a robust conversation, and I know it's a very difficult topic. So I appreciate everyone taking the time to to deliberate and discuss this further. There's a couple of things I heard throughout the conversation I just wanted to touch on and respond to. I know there was some mention of a weakening of community policing, and I think the mayor has touched on this. I think with several council members, and I think Richard and Derek and a couple other members, Kathy, I think touched on this, and I just want to reiterate it. It is part of the strain here is being down so many officers, and not being able to get up to full staffing. We've tried very hard. We've hired several classes. We've tried to, obviously COVID has impacted the size of the academies, and we're hoping to hire a very large class in January. But I do, think some council members did hit the nail on the head that being down 50 or so officers is definitely having an impact, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. The other thing I wanted to touch on, well, two other things. First, I just want to remind everyone that, especially on the first night of the riots last year, two of the individuals who were arrested, one for throwing a brick at an officer and another for throwing a Molotov cocktail at a police force, were residents of Del Mar and Troy, respectively. And on the second night, 5 of the 9 people arrested were not residents of the city of Albany. And I know earlier there was a discussion about peaceful, we don't want to use tear gas against peaceful protesters, and the mayor agrees. She supports a ban on the use of tear gas against peaceful protests, just like I think everybody in this meeting agrees. But I want to be cognizant that what happened, especially on the first night, there was violence that escalated toward not only officers, but other property, and has been well documented in this meeting and over the last year. So I just want to remind everyone of that. The mayor is not saying use tear gas against peaceful protesters. In fact, she supports a ban on the use of tear gas against peaceful protesters. And I just want to make that very, very clear for everyone here. So we're all on the same page. And lastly, I do want to reiterate again, as Kelly mentioned, this is a I know working proposal. I know there's still there's a lot of thoughts that have come out of this meeting, and I know there's going to be more discussion on it. And we look forward to having that and continuing that discussion moving forward. So just wanted to again say thank you to everyone for taking the time.
Thank you, Mr. Gowan. So I think everyone's spoken and we had our discussion. Thoughts on where we go from here? I mean, Mr. Bowen.
I guess I'd like to start on what we agree on. I mean, because this is a tough subject and there's a lot we don't agree on. So can we start on what we agree on and go from there? I mean, if someone else has a better strategy, I'm open to that. But I do think, I don't want to I don't want to keep having conversations about having conversations. So I like for us to have some conversation about the document and how we can start moving that forward. So I'm going to ask, maybe that's one strategy. And if others have other strategies, like I said, I'm open to that.
Right, and I agree, and that was my intention. But I mean, folks, the thing is, I can keep talking about this and keep restating my stance on it, as well as Mr. O'Shea. Ultimately, I don't have the final decision on this. Ultimately, we're a body, and the group decides how we move forward.
Kelly, I honestly don't, you're either for the ban or you're not for the ban. And people have to make that decision. I think people are going to make the decision on the floor.
Right.
You know, Alfredo, you mentioned come up with what we agree on. You know, anyone who is against the ban, you know, you might want to work on, you know, that other piece of legislation that came out today. But, you know, as far as us continuing the conversation tonight, I honestly think people are, you either know where you stand on this, or you're going to make a decision on the floor. So I don't know. That's my opinion.
So was that a suggestion to move forward with a vote? Is that?
Well,
Sounded like it.
you know, I mean, I think that there are people who support the ban, and those who don't. I think there should be you know, you can always try the amendment again, Kelly, if that's, you know, I don't know whose piece of legislation that is that came out this afternoon, but
Yeah,
that
it
would
was
be the amendment, I think.
right. Yeah, that was the idea for.
We weren't, people weren't ready to jump on the amendment, you know, when you introduced it, but there's been some changes made to it, and maybe there will be some additional changes.
Yeah.
But as far as us moving forward tonight, I just don't know what else.
Right.
we
Yeah.
can say.
I'm ready. I'm ready to close out. Mr. Conti.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just gonna lay out what the options are, because no one, I mean, no one wants to continue talking about this because we keep on talking around and around. So here are the options. You know, the local law C is currently existing or whatever, can be brought up for a vote. And we can either, you know, vote up or down, or however members want to vote on that. And depending on the outcome and what the mayor might do, we might be coming back to the other proposal at some point later on, or local SC can come up and someone can offer an alternative, the alternative amendment as an amendment to that. Then, you know, you will have that whole discussion. And if members as majority want to amend it to be the alternative or whatever that might be, that can happen. And then that would move the process forward quicker one way or the other. Or someone can move to table it. And then we can just have more discussions on it, which I don't think everybody wants to have. I think we have a lot of issues we need to deal with. So I think we're at the point where we've talked it through and through and through. And I think we just need to move forward and see where we're going. But yeah, that's, you know, have an up or down vote. Someone can offer amendment Monday as the alternative. Okay. And, you know, the mayor has indicated that she might not sign or she might veto in current form, which means it likely will come back to us to deal with in some other way. And so we might be back to discussing the alternative. If local SC does pass, which I don't know. I don't know where ultimately what's going to happen anymore.
Okay. Yeah. And so with that, we'll vote on it on Monday. Let's move forward and work from that space. Again, I feel like I'm talking till I'm blue in my face, and I know Judy feels the same way. So, and I know you wanted the floor vote. So just either that or someone offers an amendment, but either way, we move forward with it on Monday. So we have been round and round and round, and we've had lengthy discussions, and so to continue to go round and round is just not productive. And again, we've all put a lot of thought and effort into this, and I'm sure this isn't the end of the conversation, either police reform or the tear gas conversation. So we'll just move forward with it on Monday.
Can I just make one observation?
Sure.
Because we are dealing with so many controversial issues. And Mr. Flynn has thrown another one on the docket. But just a reminder that public comment is an hour. But, between this and good cause eviction and whatever else is going on, we just want to be cognizant that there is a limit on public comment in terms of how much, our rules provide, so that we can get on to actually deliberating and dealing with the business. Otherwise, we can be there all night Monday.
Right, okay.
Can there be public comment after regular business? I remember that in the past.
There is a provision,
split.
you can do up to an hour before we get into our regular agenda. There is a provision in the rules at the end of the meeting, after we finish and before we adjourn. If anyone wishes to make anyone who has not heard, who wishes to make additional public comment at the end can do so. There's a 30-minute limit on that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And just want to remind members, because we, when we put that limitation in the rules, there was a period where there was no limitation and public comment could go on for 4 hours. And we were then doing the people's business after midnight or, whatever. And the public then did not have the right or ability to see us acting. Now you can see the recording, I guess, but the purpose there was to be compliant with the spirit of the open meetings law and public meetings, so that the public can reasonably see our actions and deliberations at a reasonable hour. And that was the reason why we put that limitation on public comment, which is actually, I think, more liberal than other bodies, including the county legislature.
Thank you for that, Richard. So with that, motion to adjourn the meeting.
Most of the adjourned.
Yeah, okay. Thank you all. It's been a blast. It's just, so everyone be safe. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.